Absolutely mad.
The riots began because the stores could not meet the demands of Sutter Kane's novel, In the Mouth of Madness.
Kane disappeared 2 months ago without a trace. He's the guy that writes horror books.
You can forget about Stephen King. Kane outsells them all. I need to know if he's alive or dead, and I need that book.
It's a setup. I just have to work out how it's set up.
Kane's writing has been known to have an effect on his readers.
This? It's a map. This whole thing has been staged.
You just get out.
This is not reality.
It's all happening for real, Trent.
I don't know this book will drive people crazy. Well, let's hope so. The movie comes out next month.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the ATI Podcast. We're hopping in here for episode 123. Barrett back here. I got the Destin hat on tonight because we destined to have a good time. And we're about to gel, boys. We about to gel tonight, all right? And I've got Brandon Stuart of Edaw's in with us, co-hosting tonight with me. How are we doing, Brandon?
I'm in a cult now, and I love Jesus, and fuck you guys.
Par for the course for a PNW fellow. No.
Yep.
Of course, we have...
I do the opposite of whatever politically in the area that they are, so I'm now a Republican.
How the turntables, gentlemen.
He is the Charlton Heston of the group tonight.
Yes.
I
Yes,
am,
absolutely.
sure.
With those rugged good
That
looks.
guy was so great, yeah, with those fucking raunchy ass bones of his grinding against each other every time he shot a gun. What a fucking piece of shit.
I love it.
He's rotting with maggots right now.
And so Andy Triefenbach from Destroy the Brain is back with us, destroythebrain.com. How are we doing, Andy? My man.
I'm good.
It's been real.
Did you guys all hear that in your head?
Yes, we did.
Because if you didn't, his power has not reached full capacity yet.
He's still leveling up.
Yeah, doing good. It's funny because, I was, prepping everything to talk about. And last week I had 2 events to promote. Now I have fucking 5. So here we go.
Jesus Christ.
But I'm glad I got it all ironed out.
Yeah, I know you're a busy guy with Destroy the Brain. A lot of events coming up in October. We're going to hit on all of that in great detail toward the end of the show tonight so we can make sure folks tune in to what you have going on. And I know it's been just a few months since you were on the show last, but just to kind of catch everybody up, I know we briefly talked about the movie marathon, so that's happened since then. And I was in attendance, so I can speak from a customer perspective.
But we talked before, right?
Yes, we did talk before. So the All Day Grind was a wonderful event. 8 films, and what did it run, about 13 hours, almost on the dot? Close to?
14.
Little loose, right?
I screwed up because the Peeping Tom time that I did, when I planned it all out, it was perfect. But when I made those schedules, which I published so everybody could see,
right,
I was fucking 20 minutes off or something. And I realized that the runtime that I put on there was the cut version versus the uncut version, which is what we showed. So yeah, it was closer to 14 hours.
Dare you? Are you even a professional?
I was getting ready to go in for the next movie. I'm oh, this movie's got 20 more minutes left.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing about it, of course, as we detailed previously, is that nobody knew as event goers like what films were going to be watched. So whenever you came out and announced that that would be the next film, I was super pumped because actually, Peeping Tom was one of those movies that was always on the list to watch, but for whatever reason, I just never got around to it.
Yeah.
I'd seen clips from it, I knew everything about it, but I never had actually watched it from start to finish myself. So my first experience was in a theater, 4K, the uncut version. I mean, come on, man.
There's 3 groups of people with Peeping Tom. People that have seen it and they love it and adore it. I still haven't met anybody that has seen it and hated it. The second group is people that don't know what the fuck it is, and you have to kind of like, it's a nice little story you can accompany with.
Right.
The third group, and the reason why there's a third group, is mass. I think there are people that know of Peeping Tom but have never watched it. And a lot of it was the accessibility. And then recently, Criterion did a 4K. Actually, Studio Canal did a 4K restoration, and Criterion put it out here in the States. Yeah. So I was super happy to grab that because, like, it was for a long time, myself included, went years on like, oh, yeah, I hear it's great, but the availability was weird. And, I think it was like the DVD age, and I wanted a DVD, and the best you could get was a VHS copy. And then I heard it was cut. And I'm like, I'll just wait. And then it finally became like a decent copy through Criterion. Like they put it out on DVD, but then that went out of print. So anyway, it was really cool to like say, okay, I'm going to use this time to say, that movie you all have been meaning to see. Right. I'm going to show it to you and show you why it was so important.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it was for me without question. And I will say that the Peeping Tom experience was my favorite individual movie. However, my favorite block was actually the first block, was the Saturday Morning Punch, because I've been meaning for the longest time to like revisit old karate movies in particular. I watched tons of them as a kid and into my teenage years. One of the things that my dad and I would bond over is that, or my little brother. And actually recently been talking to my son about them, and he'd actually shown some interest, and I was showing him clips from like The Raid and things like that, like more present day stuff.
Yeah.
But I was like, there's a lot of movies that have come out that you would actually probably enjoy. And it was nice to, actually sit down and watch a block of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it always felt like I've done a disservice to the term grindhouse because I'm typically showing horror films. Sure, we'll show like some art stuff. We'll show like something like Angst, which is this kind of first-person serial killer movie made out of Germany that's fucking... It's actually... it's Austrian, maybe? Anyway, really good movie. But, we've shown some bleak movies, too. But the one aspect is like... I always wanted to show a kung fu movie. Like, that's part of Grindhouse. It's not just horror movies. It was exploitation, it was sexploitation, and it was kung fu. And just foreign films in general were playing at a lot of the Grindhouses because that's how they were distributed. So it was really cool to just kick it off because there was a loose idea long ago that I had with a coworker. And we were thinking of how to do an action version of Late Night Grindhouse. And I think we came up with a silly...
There's some good things you could go off of.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
for sure. There was... we came up with, like, the term Hot Action Nights. And, like, I was just thinking about it. I'm like, Saturday Morning Punch. I kind of like this. And so that was kind of a tribute to that. But also it gave me the opportunity to show, like, the Street Fighter. When I saw that, I bought that copy at, like, Schnucks. And believe it or not, like, that was a public domain, and the copy that I ended up getting at Schnucks was actually the best copy you could get of Street Fighter because it was at least anamorphic. It was great, right? And I remember I'm like, who the fuck is this badass? And, then you see him in Kill Bill, or I can't even remember if I saw him in Kill Bill first or if I saw this first. I was trying to remember that the whole time. I can't fucking remember. My memory's shot. But
I hear that.
I remember all this stupid shit about movies. I can't remember my whole life. Anyway, watching that at an impressionable age, you're just like, holy shit, this guy's a juggernaut. Why haven't I heard more about him?
Right.
That's the main sentence I actually said in school was, this guy's a main juggernaut. Why can't I
mean juggernaut?
And I was just in full juggernaut garb.
Yeah.
Like while I'm doing it.
I was just like, I think that power is still there in that movie. Let's see if we can get that. And then knew I wanted a Bruceploitation film, and I've been trying to get The Dragon Lives Again because that feels like an after effect of a marathon. Like, I'm mixing all these movies together.
I'd never seen The Dragon Lives Again either, and that was awesome. That was a real treat. It's one of those things that you read about on message boards and things like that of the day. But back to the Street Fighter, the grunting and just all of that, hearing that in the theater, how
it's all the nasal.
Sonny Chiba is just such a animal on screen. Oh my God.
I love it. I fucking love it.
It's so drawn out.
This dude is so much of a badass.
Absolutely.
And he's got like really great films too. I mean, that was supposed to be like the American debut of Sonny Chiba. I guess it was, even though I think he was technically in something else. But he was also in like a whole bunch of stuff just relegated and delegated to Japan. Like, I don't think it ever got American distribution.
Yeah, very interesting movie that I felt like you had to give most of a disclaimer to, not to get in the weeds with all of them, but was The Butcher Baker and Nightmare Maker.
Well, yeah, that and Julie Darling.
Julie Darling definitely as well, yeah. Both controversial in their own ways, without question. I'm still not quite sure what I think of either movie. I know that I went through and I rated them. I would say maybe that was my least favorite plot, which is odd because normally I would be into like fucked up psychological movies like that, or family
we used to
drama and generational drama or terror or whatever. That sort of thing would appeal to me normally, but I don't know why it just didn't land with me as well.
It's a tough spot. I'll tell you, the last two films I've always found to be maybe the hardest slot, right?
Sure.
Because up to that point, you have people that have been in the auditorium for almost 10 hours, and it's like
they've been jerking each other off the whole time.
They probably feel like they had their money's worth. Sure. So they might just dip out. And I mean, that's definitely what happened last year when we did the shot on video shit, which I love. And I still think, like, I'm glad I got to show Boarding House in a movie theater.
Yeah.
Was it the smartest move to do as a closer? Probably not. But the whole idea with the last slot is shit's weird and something is off. The wheels have fell off, but we are still going somehow. Yeah, I mean, the first one is The Black Cat, which is like this weird pseudo-sequel to Suspiria, but it's like meta, and it references the movie, but it's technically like Demon 6. But I absolutely love it. It's amazing. And I thought, like, when I watched it not that long ago prior to the marathon, I was like, this probably blends with fucking House really well. And I've been wanting to show House, even though I know most people had seen it. I think the question came to me where I was like, look, yeah, probably about 75% of the audience has seen House, but have they seen it in a theater with like-minded people?
Right.
I've heard people got to see it at Webster. That's how I got to see it the first time.
Oh, that's cool.
And then people got to see it at parties, or somebody would have it on at a party and be like, what the fuck is this? But yeah, I was like, you know what? It's a lot of fun. If you've seen it and you're done, you could walk out. So I kind of, in a weird way, I also give a out to people. Like, if this ain't your thing, I didn't put it earlier in the marathon for a reason.
Right.
With the fucked up families, I knew I was pushing buttons. But with Late Night Grindhouse, I think you kind of know that these are these time capsules of the time. So yeah, shit like dropping the F-bomb numerous times in Butcher Baker.
Right.
It's uncomfortable.
Sure.
But I mean, like, I think it was also uncomfortable back then. But yeah, you're right. It is also exploitation.
Right.
It's basically them scripting it in a way to get a reaction. It's working.
Right.
You know?
And I don't, here's my thing. And I get people's concerns. However, if you come into it with a right mind and know this is bad, these are bad people saying bad, mean things, or doing a bad thing, or they could be even good people. They just make a mistake. I think people have to take it like that. It's just it's the argument that's made against Quentin Tarantino for the longest time, right? Why do you have to say the word in your movie? And I go back and forth on either side about that. I mean, it's a good argument on either side.
Yeah,
kind of
can be made for sure.
So I mean, it's difficult. But whenever I watch a film, and it's an exploitation film like that, and it's trying to get a reaction, not just doing it just to fuck off.
Yeah,
like that to me, that's what I want to feel. That's why I watch movies.
Well, Butcher Baker, Nightmare Maker, in particular, is a very odd movie, right? It's directed by one of the co-creators of Bewitched, for crying out loud.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, William Asher, who's the director, did do a couple of other horror entries, but this was probably his most notable because of how batshit insane it is. Best performance from Susan Tyrrell, maybe. It's possible. Like, she's such a great performer, and I hope that, like, more people get, like, hip to her shit, because I think most people have probably seen Forbidden Zone, which she's great in. I think she's great in Butcher Baker. I think she's great in Angel, which is one we showed last year. those are like the mainstream Susan Tyrrell stuff. I'm still digging through her stuff.
She's in Crybaby.
Yeah, Crybaby she's fucking great at. That's probably her most mainstream movie.
Yeah, definitely.
Like,
big John Waters fan here.
Yeah, same. And, I'm like, I recognize the lady, but I never understood her body of work. And she was always eccentric, always taking these weird roles. And I know, like, she was a wild lady. I know towards the end, like, she lost her leg and all this other crazy stuff. You can read about it, actually, like, when Alamo Drafthouse was doing their early shit in the early 2000s in Texas. They're one of the ones that, like, found her and said, hey, come out to this festival. We're celebrating you.
And she was like, ate my own leg.
Oh, no.
They're like, no, you should come with us. And she goes, I ate my own leg.
Absolutely.
But honestly, like, I love Susan Tyrrell. And if that's the first time you've seen that movie, let it sit, let it simmer, and then watch it again. I guarantee you're going to dig it a little more. It is a weird movie.
Yeah, I think so. Last comment I want to make about it is I feel like in that last block, a pin would have also been a good substitute for either movie. Brandon, Rich, and I attempted to watch along with that, and we got too drunk and then ended up arguing about the Palestinian conflict for like an hour in the middle of it. So it was unusable.
Here's the like straight up. If you're not fucked up watching Pin, I don't know. I mean,
I love Pin. I love Pin. I think it's.
You too. It's very uncomfortable.
We kept saying the whole time, like how you do with friends, you try to predict what's going to happen, and we just made it way more fucked up than it ever actually was. Yeah, and it's actually, not to say it doesn't have its moments still.
It's Ridge's reactions.
Very well acted as well, though.
Yeah, no,
it's the huge surprising part to me.
It's a very well composed film, and it takes itself seriously. There's just something off. It's It's much like that double feature, that last double feature. But I really hope that someday that comes out on Blu-ray, because I think the fact that it's on DVD and it's not available streaming anywhere, it does it a huge disservice. People keep hearing about the movie.
Oddly, the entire thing's on YouTube.
I know.
Which I found out after
quality,
the fact.
But
no, it's not good quality. It sucks.
That was the difficulty too. With having
blurry,
done it as a watch along too, we were like, how are people actually going to watch this though too?
Right.
Yeah. So that was a little bit. So we never published it. We talked about it forever. We never did it. But we had some like technical issues beyond.
Maybe we'll take it back out of the tomb in about 10 more years.
Yeah.
Whenever we're old and we actually can reach over and drink each other's.
Yeah.
We get out. There's like a teleport service where you can actually do that. And we're all just. But here's the other thing I was just thinking about. We were talking about rock bottom.
Yeah.
Andy, have you had your rock bottom split from a tunnel diver yet?
What? No.
Have you gotten a colonoscopy after we've talked to you last time? You said before that you didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? It's seeing you. That reminded me.
It's like
it was here's this asshole again. Need mine explored.
This isn't HIPAA, so I'll just tell you exactly what happened with mine. They were like, we found a lot in, and I was like, huh? I was like, well, I mean,
I hope it was poop.
Backed up a couple of weeks.
I hope it was poop.
They were like, yeah, we had to take a lot of things out. I go, I'm sorry, and they were like, but nothing's cancerous, so you don't have anything to worry about. We are going to see you not in 5 years, but in 3 years. So I'm like, is my butthole healthy? I'm very concerned. But, I think it's just all the pushing out of how much anger I have.
Yeah.
I thought they were going to say it's like in the mouth of madness down there.
It is in the mouth of madness. If you get it done here in the next year, before we're on the next episode of this exact same podcast, if it does happen, you have to say, man, we have now entered the mouth of madness.
I'm just going to write it on there.
You should just
write it on the cheeks.
You should have a Sutter Kane cut out with his mouth around your anus.
Sutter Kane.
You have to sense that you're about to go down with anesthesia and have to say it right before you get knocked out.
How about that?
I need you to practice with anesthesia.
Yeah. Do some Dennis Hopper, Blue Velvet practice.
Do some anesthesia runs. We need you to do a few anesthesia runs.
Jesus.
Demonstrate it for us now.
Timing is everything.
I wake up cold every time. One step closer to death.
Well, folks, tonight's agenda is to delve right into spooky season, of course. So we are going to be officially talking about In the Mouth of Madness for its 30th anniversary, a John Carpenter film in 1994. The festival circuit late in that year, if you actually look up the U.S. theatrical release date, was actually February of 95. So we're going with the festival date for the sake of the conversation tonight. And we're going to kind of hit this thing like we did last year. So if you're a frequent viewer of the show, that's kind of going to be the format tonight. If this is your first time watching, just going to do a quick summary of how we're going to approach this thing. So we're going to give the byline of the film, just kind of what the movie's about, spoiler free. We're going to get into some of the analytic and relative news and notes prior to diving into the spoiler containing plot, which we're going to hand off the duties to Mr. Edaw's in this evening to handle. And then we're going to hit you with the recap, a review, what worked, what didn't work, just kind of some closing thoughts, that sort of stuff. And then we're going to close out talking about all the amazing events going on over at Destroy the Brain. And I'll give a quick hits on the programming for Halloween once again for us. And then if I know that Mr. Nodnarb over there has a brand new episode out, and he's on mute, I believe.
Just said it again. You're dyslexic.
Nodnarb.
There we go. We're going to change it. I think it's just going to change to the Edaw's end. Something. I don't know.
It's all good.
We'll just tie it back in. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
But yeah, so I know you just had a new episode that came out as well, Brandon, and
yeah, I
getting
just
a lot of
talked
views
to
out there.
Eric Weir. He's a really cool guy. He's been in this thing a whole lot longer than me, painting and making up ideas for games and whatnot. So it was really good talking to him. I got a few more guests coming up. I just did a collaboration with a guy, Mold. He does a lot of really interesting sculpting work that I fucking really got into, and we just did a collaboration. He sculpted and I painted. Great dude. Gonna have him on soon. So lots to look forward to now that I'm back and in a stable place and not fucking Texas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's now 65 degrees all day here. It's beautiful, man. I mean,
yeah,
it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. So
wonderful.
Yeah,
love it.
More shows to come.
Well, I think we're going to get things started off. If it works for you, Andy, I'm going to hand off to you and let you kind of give the synopsis of the film, spoiler free. So if somebody was to ask you, what's the film about, Andy, and why should I watch it?
All right. So In the Mouth of Madness is what I would consider, and I think I'm not alone, the last great John Carpenter film. And basically, if you're familiar with H.P. Lovecraft as a writer, or you at least know the impact that H.P. Lovecraft has had on future storytellers of the genre, this is probably the best Lovecraftian actual film. And I say actual film just because, like, Stuart Gordon is probably the right-hand man of, like, H.P. Lovecraft adaptations. But they're also their own beast. Like, Reanimator style, From Beyond style, that's, like, that kind of weird, sexy kink bend on it. That's Stuart Gordon. Right. That's him. That's not Lovecraft. Lovecraft is like, I'm going to write undescribable horrors and, essentially...
And be mildly racist.
Yeah, and be an asshole, for sure. He was
very
100%.
He went into his own mouth of madness as far as being a fucking terrible human being.
Yeah, I'm like, how... And you know what's funny? I used to... This is a little bit of a digression, but it does lead into this. A lot of this film was shot in Toronto, and most people know there's Fangoria, which is a U.S. magazine, but there's also Rue Morgue. They're based in Toronto, and I spent a lot of years with kind of Rue Morgue, like message boards back in the day. Got to go to a couple of conventions, all this other stuff. But what I want to say, I never really learned about Lovecraft until I started reading Rue Morgue magazine. Because I know the editors-in-chief, Rodrigo Godinho, and then even Jovanka Vukovic, she was a huge Lovecraft fan, but she would also be like, yeah, he was a fucking jackass.
Right.
He was a fucking racist. But he wrote in, like, this weird, undescribable style. And
yes.
In
Especially
a weird
for
way,
the time, man.
Yeah, it sparks your imagination. Like,
100.
It's so odd to describe the writing of H.P. Lovecraft other than it feels otherworldly, but it's also not descriptive. And it kind of, somehow the words that he uses, like, they give you slight descriptions of something, but allow that reader to kind of fill in the blanks. And I think that's kind of a really cool thing that he does. With that said, a lot of his stuff is fine. Like, At the Mountains of Madness is fucking amazing.
Yes,
I think that is an amazing movie. And for a long time, thought this was like
a direct adaptation.
Mountains of Madness,
Right.
because it sounds so similar, but it has really nothing to do with it. It's just kind of a play on the title, right?
Absolutely.
What's interesting is like, I think In the Mouth of Madness also, even though it was filmed in 93 and a few years prior to like Scream doing the meta commentary in its own way, in a creative narrative way, it is doing meta commentary. It's also, Carpenter always says that this is his last bit of his Apocalypse trilogy.
Correct.
What he considers the Apocalypse trilogy is The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness. And who am I to argue? I'm just, Quasimodo here. I'm not John Carpenter. But I always thought The Thing was not really part of the Apocalypse trilogy. A more apropos Apocalypse trilogy that I think is Prince of Darkness.
They Live.
I
agree.
And In the Mouth of Madness. And
100%. Yeah.
Here's also a nice little constant. The character actor known as Peter Jason is in all three of those.
Yes.
Mm.
So either way you dice it, this is the last kind of commentary, I think, that Carpenter really has about society. I mean, it's kind of in Vampires. It's kind of in Ghost of Mars, even though I hate those movies. I really do not like them.
I don't hate Vampires. I find it to be entertaining. I know that it's not objectively good.
It was fine.
It's got a hell of gore parts.
Yeah. And maybe I should rewatch.
I actually just rewatched it in the last 2 years.
I think
I got to refresh
the whole catalog.
But yeah, I unfortunately I saw Carpenter's next film. My first John Carpenter film in the theater was The Village of the Damned remake.
Bummer.
And I remember that being a big deal. I rented Carpenter shit all the fucking time.
Yeah,
Carpenter was probably one of my favorites, which is funny because even though Halloween was still my favorite Carpenter film, Christine was probably right behind it because there's so much style in Christine that I absolutely love. And I don't think any other director could have really done that movie. But, my mom knew, not at the time. My mom knew that I loved John Carpenter, and she liked John Carpenter as well. And she got those newspaper advanced screening passes, and we went to go see it at Ronnie's, and I'm all fucking stoked. I'm like, yeah, I'm seeing the new John Carpenter.
Yeah.
I was basically Cartman. I was like, who is that? That's me.
Mom, you go sit outside in the lobby.
But we watched it, and my mom, her poor heart, she loved the original, and she was like, yeah, that wasn't good.
No.
But
good for your mom. Good for your mom, though, for recognizing.
In the Mouth of Madness, I think, is his last really great film. And there's a lot of just interesting things. He has to stay on a technical level. I think there's a lot of interesting things narratively. I think Sam Neill is amazing.
100%. He is the
even at that point in time, right? You had everybody knew Sam Neill because of Jurassic Park. And it's hey, Sam Neill from Jurassic Park or Possession.
Omen 3.
Or Omen 3, So I thought, this would actually do gangbusters in the movie theater, and it didn't. I remember...
That's crazy.
Remember keeping an eye on it. It was on, a Fangoria cover, I think. Definitely in a couple of the issues that I read. I'm like, fuck, I can't wait to see it. And then I saw it on VHS, and I'm like, this movie's fucking wild, man. I was always creeped out by it. Because, at the beginning... What's always interesting about the film is the color palette. I would just say, see In the Mouth of Madness if that is a blind spot in the John Carpenter realm, or if you love reading books, or if you love observing mass hysteria based off of hey, I got to buy this Cabbage Patch doll, or my kid's gonna fucking disown me.
Then just be welcome to 2024.
Yeah. Right. And I don't know if that's a good thing because now all the riots that you see during the movie, it's oh yeah, that's what,
Furbies.
Yeah, that happened.
It just happened.
That happened last week.
It happened. That's an everyday thing.
Right.
Yeah. It may be like that over consumerism, but it's still like that in general over panic and disorder.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Haha. Of course, we've hit on some of the players involved, of course, in the Mouth of Madness. Basically, just, I guess, in short, is the Sam Neill's character, John Trent in the movie, is insurance investigator and is hired out freelance to investigate claims. And they've got an insurance writer, a policy on a missing author, a famous author, Sutter Kane. And so the publishing company basically puts out a hit to find him, and Sam Neill's character takes the job.
They put out a hit?
Yeah.
Which copy did you download?
It's featuring Chapel Roan. It's
Funny enough, the
it's good drink.
company's ran by one Charlton Heston, a gentleman of such lovely history, more in our lifetimes that is, not looked on so favorably by our lot, but certainly
I wonder why.
iconic
Maybe
film
it's a
career.
stoic look of fucking racism and shitheadness.
All the lovely NRA stuff is just all you can ever think of him. People of our age, I think,
Carpenter has 2 commentary tracks on that Shaft Factory release that you can see behind Barrett, and I have somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I flipped it over. I got the slipcover. I wanted to brag about that, but
That's dope.
Yeah, I'm that asshole. I put it in a bag because
hey, why not?
I'm scared.
I don't blame you.
I don't blame you.
Yeah.
I do that with all my records and comics. I really need to do that with my movies as well.
That's the way I see it. It's like, well, if I do it for this, fuck it.
Yeah.
Barrett, you were so good about that type of shit, though, because I am not whatsoever.
You're just throwing them around the room.
I don't even, I have my collection. I haven't bought one in a long time. I just haven't collected. The thing I collect now is body parts, mostly miniature ones that I put together.
That tracks.
Mostly.
I'm surprised you don't have a flannel shirt on.
I made something out of a goat skull the other day.
There you
Maybe
go.
one.
So on that Scream Factory release, there's 2 commentary tracks, both with Carpenter. One is with the cinematographer and Carpenter. The other one is with Carpenter and his wife. Whenever Charlton Heston comes on, both tracks do talk about, I think the one with the cinematographer, he talks about in the 50s, this guy was hard left wing. He was he was a very important figure for equal rights.
Yes.
I'm I remember this.
Yes.
And then he's somewhere down the line, he got older and he became head of the celebrity head of NR.
How does this happen?
It was because he was in the 10 Commandments, guys. We
Basically.
Come
yes.
on.
Guys,
that was the catalyst.
Yes.
It's either got to be because
gotta be.
No, if that's what life is at the very end, where you just become old and racist and fucking Republican, I'm gonna blow my brains up.
I don't know. Kind of tracked for my dad at the end, to be honest with you. So
yeah.
He turned that way.
Maybe it's a third generation, hopefully.
Oh, maybe.
But yeah, I always did find that odd that Charlton Heston was in this movie. But, it was fine because it's a guest star thing. But
sure.
Of course, if this movie was made today, I guarantee you Carpenter wouldn't fucking put him in there.
No.
Because he's obviously stronger on his political views. I think everybody has become stronger on their political views because
you get more
for a lot of us, it's the other side doesn't politically make fucking sense. And the reason... Anyway,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking to 2 guys that could turn this into a 3-hour podcast about that specifically.
I know.
Talk for 6
but
hours
you talked about Pin and how that's not coming out, so I can't fuck this up.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's funny. I put my kid and my wife and my mother-in-law all in my bedroom and cuffed them, so I do have to release them in about 30 minutes.
Well, that's your responsibility, not ours.
It's on you.
That's fair.
So, just to round out what happens in the movie, spoiler free. So, Sam Neill, John Trent is on this journey to find the missing author, and madness ensues. So that's basically, I guess, a spoiler free version of what the movie's about.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, John Trent is basically the Mulder, or not the Mulder. He's the Scully.
The Scully.
And basically, he's just he knows this is bullshit. The minute he was assigned to it, he's a publisher is trying to find their missing author.
Right.
And then coincidentally, there are these riots that seem to revolve around the book releases.
Right.
He's this is obviously a fucking scam, but I'll play along.
Right.
And there's even interesting stuff so what I did was I tried to, act smart, and I did listen to the commentary. I didn't listen to both of them, but it's interesting because, I think it's no secret that John Carpenter loves 40s and 50s cinema.
For sure.
Most of his movies are quasi-remakes of something. A lot of Howard Hawks stuff. And he does talk about how he directed Sam Neill in the scene where John Trent, so he's hired on by Arcane Publishing. And Arcane Publishing has this client who is obviously their Stephen King.
Right.
Sutter Kane.
Right.
Sounds similar, huh? So
Absolutely.
Anyway, Sutter Kane goes missing, and he is to deliver his next book, which they have obviously already put a whole bunch of P&I behind, because they already have the poster slapped up in the alley where a cop fucking beats on some graffiti artist later. Right. But what's interesting about the scene is, like, love how Sam Neill plays it, because he's like, sure, you want me to go find this town?
Right.
And he's like, if you want, I'll play along. And he does this move where he shakes his hand. And John Carpenter's like, yeah, I stole that from Howard Hawks. There's a character that does that, and I really loved what it signified. It signified, like, I'll play along, and it's like a snarky kind of comeback.
Yes.
And I love that there are little nuances to this. The other interesting thing that I've always found about, like, in the Mouth of Madness for Carpenter, at a technical level, is a lot of this film is shot like a Carpenter film. And what I mean by that is Carpenter shoots wide. He shoots in Panavision.
Yes.
So it's always going to be like 2.35, 2.45, whatever. I think it's typically 2.35.
Yeah.
But he does a lot of close-ups.
Yes.
And during the commentary track, he talks about this. I never picked up on it until they mentioned it. So those close-up shots when Sam Neill's cutting the covers of the Sutter Kane books to form the map, prior to that handshaking that I was talking about.
Yes.
There are shots in there where the table is moving, but Sam Neill is holding completely still. But in order to have this sense of movement in the shot, they're like, move that table and we'll just kind of swivel the camera a little bit.
Did it kind of feel like something that Sam Raimi would do?
Because it felt honestly, like there's a lot of like really interesting things in here.
Type of
and for the most part,
for sure.
For the most part, like the beginning of the movie, the procedural part of the film, it's all neutral. It's like browns, mobs. There's little pops of color. Typically, those pops of color are coming from the Sutter Kane content, whether that's cover art
even
or whatever.
The guy,
But like, you know, this movie, and I don't know if this makes me sound stupid, but Liar Liar, there's a lot of mauve and brown tones in Liar Liar. That's what that always reminded me of.
That's so funny.
It's like, there's a lot of that. But like, there's a scene right now that I have playing. I don't think I can switch my camera though. But where the hotel keeper, right, the innkeeper, the bed and breakfast lady, Mrs. Pickman, she's got like this dull red kind of dress on, and then she's got red under her eyes.
That increased.
So it's just interesting to like watch the movie, especially like if you have it on in the office, like I did when I was working today. I'm like, man, the color palette on this is actually a lot more sophisticated than you would think, because it has these little hints of color. And then by the time we get to the Lovecraftian shit, where there's like a
see everything.
Greg Nicotero talks about it as like this kind of flesh and latex parade float under that corridor, which we'll get to them, I guess, later. A lot of shadow. There's other colors that pop in, and I just love that there's so much technical thinking behind this movie. And then if you watch his later work, I don't really see that anymore. It seems like this was his final film, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of that ambition that's in this film that you didn't see in most of his later films. I will echo that for sure. Let me run through some analytics real quick, cast and crew, and then, because we're already hitting on some of this discussion, the deeper points of the film, and then we want to make sure that Mr. Nodnarb over there has the opportunity to give us his lovely rundown of the film. So, news and notes. Release date, we talked about this at the open of the film, actually hit the festival circuit beginning back in August 10th of 1994. The actual U.S. theatrical release date was on February 3rd of 1995. Runtime of 95 minutes. This has got that perfect movie runtime for me. Like last year, we kind of talked about this too with most of the horror films, and I didn't do this on purpose. Most of them ran in that 90-minute range. Keeps the story moving, keeps things nice and tight, and doesn't over-explain things, leaves a lot to the viewer's imagination, so on and so forth, which this film does very well as well. Director, of course, John Carpenter. We've mentioned him many times. If you're not familiar with John Carpenter or his work, of course, I'll just give you some of my favorites. Assault on Precinct 13, The Thing, They Live, Halloween are probably right up toward the top echelon. We've got writer Michael DeLuca, who's actually more of a ubiquitous and prolific film producer, even present day. He's only got very few writing credits in his career. He actually did the Freddy TV series and the Judge Dredd movie, of all things. So, not
the original
writer. Mike DeLuca, man.
Stallone?
Mike DeLuca is
Stallone,
this really, I think, a really kind of cool guy. And I'll tell you this. The guy was entrenched in horror from the get-go. Definitely. He started as a scriptwriter. I think he worked on like Freddy's Nightmares. And he helped also develop like Leatherface like how to bring that into New Line Cinema.
Right.
And then also kind of did writing, I think, on Freddy's Dead, which I would love to talk about Freddy's Dead because I know everybody shits on that movie. It is not the worst Nightmare on Elm Street movie.
No,
and dare I
it's not.
say, it is probably better than a lot of them. But I digress.
That's a take. That's a take, though. Yeah.
Look, it's 1, 3, 2, Freddy's Dead for me, I think. And
1
then
and 3
4
are
and
definitely 1
5.
and 2 for me. Yeah.
I don't consider New Nightmare part of it. But anyway, what I love about DeLuca is he kind of worked up the ranks with New Line Cinema. And this was, I believe, a script that he worked on before he was even in the business.
That's correct.
And he always wanted John Carpenter to get it.
I think he had a draft as early as 1987, if I remember correctly.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
But he always wanted Carpenter to do it. But I think either Carpenter passed
on the first time, yes, because he was busy making The Invisible Man with Chevy Chase.
Yep. Which I'm sure he regretted. But I know, like, New Line Cinema originally had Tony Randall to direct it, and that dude, he put out Amityville 1992, It's About Time, and he also did Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, which
I like.
I need to rewatch the Hellraiser series, but
The
I
opening
remember
scene
for a
alone.
long time, I always liked 2 more than the first one.
There are things about 2 that I do like more, yes.
Yeah, they're for me too. Yeah,
it's the gore, and it leans into like the weird horniness of that universe.
Yeah.
It was already weirdly horny, but but
they lean harder.
But I think that movie, like, that kind of just opens up the world, whereas the first one, it's just like, oh, this kind of feels like this voodoo intimate tale. Or
it's almost, it takes a 2D story and makes it 3D, really, or at least breaks through another dimension, I should say.
For sure. You know, I mean, Mike DeLuca, he kind of entrenched himself in the genre in New Line Cinema and kind of came up with, you know, as Freddy was fleshing that studio out, and he had this. And I think this might even be the only New Line Cinema Carpenter joint. I can't remember. But it very well may be, because I know John Carpenter, and you can hear it kind of in the commentary with his wife as well, who was also a producer of this movie. It sounded like Bob Shaye was kind of a weird guy. Bob Shaye is somebody I've kind of looked up to for a while, because that dude started New Line Cinema by just fucking carrying 35 millimeter theatrical prints of movies he picked up to distribute, and would go to the theaters and be like, okay, here you go to exhibit for tonight. Yeah. But then I need to get that back like after the weekend so I can go to the next place. He did a lot of legwork. He did a lot of grunt work, and I always appreciate that. But at this point, you know, I mean, you're in like early 90s of New Line Cinema. Freddy's Dead has happened. So now their cash cow is kind of gone. They're trying to create new horror franchises, or they're trying to, you know, they were able to get the Texas Chainsaw rights, and they were able to do Jason. Wow. So they went to Jason Goes to Hell, right? And that was supposed to be the crossover with Freddy. And it's always interesting to like listen to all these production stories. But Michael DeLuca wrote this, and if I remember correctly, hasn't he? This is like an Academy Awarded, like nominated, maybe even won. I can't remember.
I'm pretty confident that he has one.
But he's also like a bigwig at Warner Brothers right now. Like he's a pretty head honcho, and I want to say that he deals a lot with New Line, because what they want New Line Cinema to be is the genre arm of Warner Brothers. Now, obviously, some of this stuff has changed since the whole streaming takeover and everything.
Absolutely.
Which, mind you, a movie like In the Mouth of Madness could never be made today, because no way in hell would anybody give the same budget that they did for this movie. And this budget was still like, it was $8 million, and that was low budget. You're lucky to get $8 million now.
Yeah,
dude,
it was 8 even.
But I think that it could be done for cheaper.
Well, maybe. There's movies that you could point to, and we can get to that toward the end, you know, to make some comparisons. Just let me run through the rest of this. Director of photography is Gary B. Kibble. He prominently worked with Carpenter basically from the start of Prince of Darkness all the way to Ghosts of Mars, from what I recall. I know he did RoboCop 3 and Double Dragon were some of his other prominent, you know, credits. And then we got, for the special effects, Industrial Light and Magic did the visual effects. And then, so that's like your CGI stuff, which was in its infancies and actually done very tastefully in this movie, I might add, and we'll get into that more. But then we got K&B Effects, legendary effects group for the practicals. So, and Andy's mentioned him a few times here, Greg Nicotero, I think one of the most unsung and under talked about people in all of horror. and his contributions on the practical end of things. People of present day might ring a bell because he was a showrunner briefly on The Walking Dead. Did a lot of the early makeup and stuff with them until he had a falling out. I think with Kirkman, he seems to have a falling out with everybody. Becomes an asshole after a while. You know,
he was still a showrunner on the Creep Show series, I think.
Yes, I think so. Which is now on Shudder, right?
Yeah,
that's what I thought. And then, of course, cast. We mentioned some of this already. So we've got Sam Neill as John Trent. We mentioned prominent credits such as Jurassic Park, Almond 3, Possession. More present day, Hunt for Wilder People, one of his better roles, I feel like, as well as his appearances in Peaky Blinders. He's excellent in Peaky Blinders, if anybody's checked that out. Julie Carmen as Linda Stiles. Most prominently, she was really like an 80s and TVs movie actress, which I think conveys itself in the acting performance for her. Jürgen Prochnow, of course, is Sutter Kane.
Hell yeah.
He got a very distinct look.
Yeah.
Das Boot, Dune, Judge Dredd. You know, he's one of those guys that you see, I recognize him right away, you know. So David Warner, Dr. Wren, and this is going to be an amazing connection here as well. So we've got a couple of folks that have been involved with the Batman animated series in this movie as well. He was Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul, whatever your preference is. I've heard it enunciated both ways, and in canon as well, in the film canons. But he's also in Titanic, Tron, and Star Trek VI, any of my Trekkies out there. And then we got Charlton Heston, we mentioned earlier, of course, Jackson Harglow, obviously, you know, famous, world famous for Planet of the Apes, Ben-Hur, Ten Commandments, and then, of course, the NRA gun nut of our generation. And then
I've never heard of him.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah. Good riddance, huh? That's heard. John Glover is the other Batman animated series connection here. He actually did the Riddler's voice in the Batman animated series, and then he did a live depiction either in Titans or Gotham, and I can't remember which because I didn't watch either personally, but I've seen screen grabs of him as their version of the Riddler.
I don't watch CW shit.
Yeah, right. He's Saperstein, kind of like the head orderly in the movie, and he also has roles in both Gremlins 2 and Scrooged, which are both movies that I enjoy as well. Distributed by New Line Cinema, we mentioned that. Budget was $8 million. Box office was 8.9, so it wasn't a total failure. However, the studio did not look at it as a success because it was critically panned, as well as it barely went across the black. Or into the black, I should say. With studios, especially at this time, were not forking out money for sequels that weren't I don't want to say staggering profit, but certainly more considerable than this.
Yeah.
Reception, we mentioned it. This actually, oddly to me, this was a surprise, has a 7.1 on IMDb. It's a little higher than I expected for it to be on IMDb personally, because usually they're pretty stringent with some of their ratings. 59% on Rotten Tomatoes. We've got a 3.8 out of 5 on Letterboxd, which is kind of an average rating on there. 89% of Google users like it, and Siskel and Ebert gave it 2 out of 4 stars. Funny enough, we talked about how it was kind of critically panned at the time, but the French magazine, Tiers du Cinéma, listed this in its top 10 films that year, and it was number 10.
So much like the French know something about movies.
Exactly. Carpenter getting that international love that he always gets as well. So it's kind of like, you know, the international markets kind of catch on earlier than we do, where almost Carpenter's filmography is just riddled with movies that just really, he was just a cult filmmaker, to be honest with you. That is what Carpenter is. Almost every single movie that he did from its initial release was considered a failure, either critically or box office. And then as time went on, hit the VHS markets, hit the DVD markets into the 90s, gained its late 90s, gained its popularity, gained its cult status. I think we're going to really make a case of that tonight with In the Mouth of Madness. So
I think if this came out at a different time, I think it would have done.
I can see it going both ways. I can see it
both
going
ways. Yeah,
it really depends.
I mean, especially if it came out a little bit later, whenever everybody was like obsessed with twists.
Yeah,
I think people would have fucking seen it as like the Sixth Sense.
The 2000s turn of the century type movement that was going on, which, funny enough that we mentioned that, a lot of the editing in this kind of is ahead of its time, because a lot of those movies would go on to have kind of that frantic editing that this has, the cuts back and forth that you see, that wasn't actually really typical Carpenter, at least up to that point in his filmography either. So kind of interesting where film goes. So I'm going to give Edaw's in, Mr. Brandon Stuart, an opportunity to run through what happens in the movie, and it's all going to be spoilers from here on, folks. So if you haven't seen the movie, take a watch. What you doing with yourself?
Seriously, I don't know why it took me this long. I was telling these guys before that I know a lot less about Carpenter than what I thought, and it kind of feels good because I can find it later on in my life, and I can feel those joys again as an adult and feel like a kid again.
Sure.
So this was my first time watching it and my first reaction to it. and was fucking obsessed from the very beginning. I think it is very much a classic Carpenter feel from the older films that he did, and the dialogue especially. Like, this very much feels like a They Live movie. Like, it's the same universe in my head. And going on what Andy was talking about before about him loving 40s and 50s movies, a lot of the dialogue in this is very between Sam Neill and the female actress is very like, yeah, see, like,
Yeah, I mean, Carpenter mentioned his girl Friday, like the dynamic those two leads have in there, and it definitely, you see the influence for sure. Once you know that, it's like, oh, okay, it's this like noir kind of banter, this back and forth,
which
just a crazy dame.
I think the reason why I loved it so much is because they hit on all of like the tropes in this scenario, right? This crazy like, well, you got to do this, and it's inconsequential. It could have been a kidnapped like adult or a kid later on. And did you kidnap your own, or did you? And they end up in this. They start seeing these visions. That's the thing that kind of like sets everything off and makes it more Carpenter, right? And it starts to make it actually a little bit more Stephen King. And the other thing that I was going to mention, a little bit of Clive Barker. Like, I feel like in this, he's a little bit talking about Clive Barker, like the more grotesque stuff. So, like, it's very evident that he's talking about Stephen King whenever he goes to the front desk.
Yeah.
Whenever he's talking about the lady killing her husband. And correct me if I'm wrong, Clive Barker was around during this.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
this time.
Yes.
But I feel like he starts off with Stephen King, and then he graduates to Clive Barker with the Cthulhu shit. I mean,
well, I think Sutter Kane in his own persona, right? The whole commentary with Sutter Kane is, it sounds like Stephen King. It sounds like a household name. Right. Whether it was anybody in genre, you could probably easily say like Tom Clancy or something like that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But it's a notable, and for whatever reason, sometimes these the ones that stick around and the ones that stick out seem to have this phonetic kind of melody, like Stephen King.
Right.
The K is hard, man. It's like Stephen King, they got you. Or, you know, I could be talking out of my ass, but obviously,
I mean,
like, I feel that's what they wanted to portray. And, like, there's a reason why the author's name, when you see all the artwork in the film, is the same height as the fucking title of the book.
Right.
And I also like that there's kind of, and this is why I think They Live is part of the Apocalypse trilogy, is that there is a little bit of overflow of commentary on consumerism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, you know, these people are going mad because
100%.
they need this new book. And obviously, like, I think he's just kind of more or less putting a bow on what he said in They Live before moving on and saying, hey, I just want to tell a really scary story and blur the lines of reality and not reality, and how we can get lost as a society in that, regardless if it's how we're consuming media, how we're consuming news. However, I think his whole thing, and it's apparent in all movies, is that there's societal commentaries that he's making with all three of the movies. Maybe not as much with this one.
Right.
But like I said, I think he's just kind of running out and saying, okay, this is still my Apocalypse trilogy because this is what everything happens like when shit does hit the fan.
Right.
That's what I love about it. It's kind of, it's not a bleak ending, but it is a bleak ending because you know what's happening.
I
know there's like a different ending that was talked about and all this other stuff. And Greg Nicotero talks about how this huge afflicted, like the town was going to get swallowed up in a book or something.
Yes.
So they paired
the budget
it back.
ran out.
Yeah. And I'm like, thank God you paired it back. I think having something like where he goes to see the movie. And I love the line where they're like, we had to make a movie, or the movie comes out next week or next month, because they know that consumers are going to go see movies versus reading the books. I'm one of them.
And here's the other thing too, man, to finish that like whole synopsis out, is that Sam Neill ends up finding out later on during this whole thing, he's like seeing these gradual horrors as it goes along. And it's almost like he's in a trance already as it is, because he just never attempts to leave.
Yeah.
Like so he's just kind of caught up with everything that's going on. He's very interested, finds out the reason why he's so interested is because he's part of the writing and part of the
Sure.
ending to the book. I think the thing for me out of all of it, first of all, Sam Neill's performance, if you don't have that, I don't think you have the same movie. I
No.
think that you have a wishy-washy movie. I think he did well at casting.
Yes.
There's parts in here where I don't think I've ever seen him in a movie where I hated him as much as I did. But the sculliness of him was starting to piss me off. And I was like,
Yeah.
bro, like, I know you're a little bit
Yes.
cocky and you're a little bit sexist.
So
We got to get this, we got to
Yeah.
nail this on the fucking head, bro.
yeah, to drive that point home, so really, let's kind of talk about this chronologically. So the movie actually opens up with Sam Neill in a mental institution, throwing a fit going in, and it
Yeah.
has its darkly comedic moments. And Sam Neill wanted to play this character comedically. That's actually how he read it. And Carpenter thought that was kind of interesting, and he let that clash with how Carpenter perceived the character. And that's why you've got all these nuances in Sam Neill's performance. So like I didn't mean to kick you in the balls thing, or kick you that hard in the balls.
It was a lucky shot.
Yeah, it was
That's
a lucky
all.
shot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let me out. There's little moments like that throughout the movie, but what I like about this movie is it doesn't force feed the ideas that, again, kind of back to some of the tropes that Braden alluded to that plague movies and still do to some extent, where they have to spell everything out for you. And there's
like,
a time
this is
jump, right? So he's in the mental institution, if you will, and so then it cuts back because as he's starting to tell his story to the psychiatrist, Dr. Wren, that is, and it jumps back and you actually see him as this skeptic that we keep talking about, and he's works for an insurance agency, and he's supposed to find fraud, and he finds this guy who's cheating on his wife, and his wife's cheating on him, and they're trying to take advantage of the system, and so that he's just a guy that's really great at his job. Well, then all of a sudden,
Sounds like my life.
I guess, is it not Sutter Kane's agent, I believe, comes busting through the window with an axe, and and while they're sitting there discussing taking on this job, if you will, and he actually attacks John Trent while he's at lunch discussing taking the job.
Yeah, and I think there's also really something interesting about that scene that I'm sure people pick up on, but I've always looked at that scene as that's not only an introduction to the problem, right? Like
Correct.
the thing that is the catalyst of why they need to find Sutter Kane as soon as possible so the world doesn't fall apart by these people. But just take a look at that scene. That guy comes from across the street.
Correct.
Yeah,
and then we have
a long time, yeah.
We have this two-shot of Trent sitting on one side and Brendan Casey's character, who I'm forgetting his name, but works with John Trent. And they're talking about the job, and he's talking about Sutter Kane, and he's like, oh, you don't know? This guy has been missing for blah, 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 and they want you to go try to find him. Meanwhile, this guy is walking across the street, jumping over a gate, and then he stands at the window until this certain line hits its fucking end, and he shatters the window and comes in, and he looks down at John Trent and says, "Do you read Sutter Kane?"
Yeah, it's almost like he's an ad.
Here's what I love about
an ad that you haven't
he's
been
the voiceover guy, right?
Yeah,
Like the 70s movies.
Yeah.
He's got the subwoofer already built into his trachea.
Motherfucker, I'm trying to
what
start
I love
this
about
story.
it is that the scene up to that point, the window is the wall, the window is the barrier, and now you're going to have essentially the conflict come through this fucking thing. It's almost like textbook screenwriting.
It's opening the can of worms, right?
Well, and we all
to the sweat drop down,
drip down my
down
balls. Yes. But the other thing is, I think throughout the film, the whole thing is about the blending of reality and non-reality, and how do you tell the difference? But I think that scene is also a visual and kind of iconic catalyst for what's about to happen, because you'll see that happen in different ways.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of meta commentary behind this whole film as well. I love it.
So this is kind of where the consumerism conflicts get introduced as well. In the background, you see the ads, even on buses driving by for the upcoming movie, In the Mouth of Madness. All the book covers and everything, just all the artwork is all homages to current artists of the time, mainly Stephen King, as we've mentioned, Clive Barker as well, alive and well at this time.
It just felt like that. It just felt like that during certain moments. It just felt
Wait. You know what I realized? We didn't even talk about John Carpenter's Enter Sandman.
Real quick, because I will say this. I always know whenever I ask Barrett, every time I do a you or Doug episode, I always ask him the time constraints, and that's the reason why I fucked it up this time. I should know that it should be a 6-hour show every single time. Guys, I love you both to death, but you guys you have a lot of knowledge.
Yeah.
I have 15 more minutes. All I want to say is, at one point in the movie, Sam Neill, whenever he goes up with the chick to the front of the house, and they're checking it out, nobody's outside. My favorite part in the whole fucking movie is they go outside of the atrium, and it's empty, right? And like, that's weird. In the book, it was like full of some monstrosity.
Right.
Now I'm thinking like it's a lush inside, and then something was created out of that at this perfect moment in the movie. They have to bring that moment back, and they step outside the atrium, and there's just a dude doing this. There's no vegetation.
Yeah.
There's no nothing. It was the funniest fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I laughed so hard. I had to pause the show. I was crying because there was just one guy just.
Yeah.
It was so
that is like the only part of the movie that didn't play out in the way that I expected it to play out.
I was like, at least put some more plants around him. Like, make it out to be like he's in the middle, but it's just one dude in the lightning strikes that are like.
That's the curse of trying to bring, Lovecraft to the screen because they use direct quotes from H.P. Lovecraft's work to describe the horrific scenes. Like there's several occasions at which Stiles herself, when she's reading from passages from the unfinished Sutter Kane story, it's literally stuff from H.P. Lovecraft's work over the years. So, but yeah,
it was just so wild to me, man. It was
absolutely.
It was a great watch just because of moments like that, and the twist is really fucking phenomenal.
This gets us to the point that Sam Neill's character needs to go and meet the publishing company. So this is enter Charlton Heston as the head of the publishing company, as well as the Linda Stiles character we mentioned earlier, played by Julie Carmen. And there's a bit of cat and mouse, will they, won't they? Hungry eyes being exchanged back and forth between John Trent.
A forcing of one's arm up against an elevator.
Yeah.
I don't know if they will, they won't they. I think that's it. Yeah.
It's more, I will.
And I think the only reason why she was turned on is because she's into that kink. Because any other person, I'd be like, sir, that's how me and Barrett met.
Mm.
You forcing yourself on me?
He forced my arm. Yeah, small me forced myself on him. Yeah.
That tracks. So, anywho, he takes the job. He's morbidly curious. He's a skeptic. He, being John Trent, he wants to, get to the bottom of this. He wants to prove everybody wrong. He's of the theory of the mind that perhaps this is staged. He even kind of makes those accusations a few different times. Once he discovers, we mentioned this earlier in the discussion, he discovers that the covers make a map as he starts to begin to read the work of Sutter Kane, which he wasn't familiar with previously, starts having these nightmares, starts going further into madness. He actually gets this idea that he's going to go on this trip up into New Hampshire at, what was the establishment called? Something End.
Hobbs End.
Hobbs End. Yeah. Yes, I kept wanting to say World's End, but that's a Cornetto trilogy thing. So
we could talk 3 hours about that too.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
But Hobbs End. So they head out to Hobbs End. He and Stiles, the Charlton Heston character, forces Stiles to go with him. They go on a road trip, and Stiles starts to see things as they're driving at night. John Carpenter on a bike riding down with an old man mask.
Oh, I wanted to get to this part, and I'm so glad that you brought this part up because I remembered it this morning. I'm like, I have to bring that up.
This part to me is the part that is the only part that I really had an issue with, other than the one you mentioned previously.
I disagree. Whenever I saw him going down the road, and then whenever they were seeing the young and the old, it bothered me. I didn't care for that whatsoever.
Yes.
It was a silly face because it was Carpenter, but at the same time, it felt icky. Like every time we see the bike, I'm like, I don't want to go on this highway. That's
the problem that I have with it is just how good all the makeup is in the entire movie and the practical effects, and that is just a little stagey, lacking, hulking to me, So
and it doesn't match the same depth of the skin on the outside of the body and stuff like that. It just felt.
He's looking like the mask of the '80s, not the Jim Carrey mask.
Right.
Film.
It kind of felt like a little. Yeah. God.
What is that, like Eric Stormier? I can't remember who played him.
Oh, Eric Stoltz.
Eric Stoltz, that's right. Eric Stoltz.
And Cher and Sam Elliott. Oh my God, I love that family.
Fantastic. Fantastic family dynamic.
Rocky Dennis, baby.
Yeah. Person gets hit on a bike. They get up. They take off. They look back smilingly. Back at Stiles. Oddly, Sam Neill, the skeptic of all people, doesn't see anything bizarre about that.
No, he comes running up to the girl like
I guess he
Well, here's the thing. They were standing next to him whenever the kid fell off, right?
Yeah.
Or the old man fell off. Then he comes running up behind her after the fact. So I don't know if the intention was to say that the writer, Sutter Kane, was rewriting a certain part and being like, oh, yeah, we kind of fit John Carpenter into this part, and he's a little bit weird, and then he came up after.
Sure.
I guess you could go down that.
I like that comedic take on it. I think it's more about like the characters that Sutter Kane's building in this universe is kind of like an ever-evolving world, and it's like it's in the process of, if you will. Some of these characters are trying to escape because you do later see this in the film, right? And especially as these characters start to get the idea that, or become self-aware in the sense that they are characters in a story, and they actually their destiny is determined, and they don't get to choose what they do.
Almost like kind of demons, yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of foreshadows some of that, if you will.
Well, even that character, that kid, right? Because it is a kid. He's like, he won't let me out.
Right.
And I'm like, fuck.
Yeah, it just felt, the whole area just felt so weird to me. Like, whenever we delved into that specific part, it was like, oh, this is real. We're not just fucking around anymore. We're not going to be just campy at sometimes. We're going to be serious.
We're about to get batshit crazy.
Yeah, it just left me feeling weird. Like, that's the type of shit that you think of whenever you think of nightmares. Nothing that has, like, real plot, right?
Right.
It's just all these weird fucking occurrences that happen that he was onto before they started doing that creepy shit in the early 2000s and later on in the 2010s and 2020s. So I feel like, it was just bizarre. Didn't feel right. It was a little bit silly, but it straightened out pretty quickly.
Yeah. So John Trent and Stiles, they go into a literal ghost town where they occasionally see pop-ups of humanity, a few and far between, but they check into this weird hotel ran by this elderly couple with a painting that constantly moves and changes and morphs throughout every shot that it's, in the background thereof. Stiles is the person that is being manipulated first, in the sense that she's seeing all these changes, really more so than Sam Neill's character. Now, you can look at this from 2 points of view. You can look at it because he is the skeptic and he's in denial and he's just refusing to see these things. Or secondly, procedurally, just as you're watching it, that it just hasn't affected him yet.
Yeah,
because the can hasn't really opened up for him, if you will, to use that analogy again.
The main character doesn't get as affected as early on as the other characters. Like, the other characters already changed, and it seems like she's like a new introduction along with the Charlton, that piece of shit. And then we add Sam Neill, and then Sam Neill feels it like the very last. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a connection, maybe it's not. It just feels like it kind of...
So the place that they check into, of course, is the place that Brandon alluded to with the monster earlier, and that is the Log Lady Inn, if you will. And there's something weird going on with the husband. He's not around. You know that she has a husband, and because it's already, again, been written in the story, so Stiles is telling Sam Neill's character this entire time, John Trent, hey, like, there's supposed to be a husband. He's missing. Like, this is going to get really crazy. So they start exploring the town. She sees packs of wild kids running around, like, which almost kind of like foreshadows that
Children of the Corn.
Yeah, well, Children of the Damned, even the fact that he's going to go on to direct that movie next.
Yeah,
and that he being John Carpenter. And so, like, the kids disturb me a lot, especially as you progressively got closer and closer with the push-ins with the makeup and stuff. Dogs running around in fields as well, like, seems like stray dogs and that sort of thing.
Like roving bands, yeah.
Yeah, and then progress into them coming upon the church because they see it in the distance inside the hotel. They go to the church, which is an actual fixture up in Canada where this is shot, and it's actually like depicted just like a church inside of H.P. Lovecraft's books or stories, that is, as well. So the translatability was kind of, I guess, haunting, if you will, whenever you put that into context. And so turns out Sutter Kane is living inside the church. They open up the doors. They see a young boy who then morphs into a full-grown man, and I guess they had Doberman Pinschers, I believe, dogs.
Like,
I guess his hounds of hell, if you will.
There was like literally 80 of these fucking dogs, just like they had them just running out. There was 5 at a time. Like more waves of dogs. I just wonder what that accomplishes eventually.
Well, what's interesting about that scene, and I think the reason why it works so well and it feels otherworldly at that point, is because Carpenter uses slow-mo. And if you go back and watch a lot of his movies, he does not use a lot of slow-mo.
Yeah.
He actually, I think, is on record at some point saying he hates it. He thinks it's he looks at it like a storytelling thing where it's like it's a falsity. It's not, it's like more trickery than anything. It's a gimmick. But he's I think even in the commentary of this, if I remember correctly, he even mentions, like, I wonder why I did that.
Oh,
Because
really?
he just doesn't do it. But I think it works well. He uses the slow-mo on the dogs, and he uses it, I think, whenever the kids kind of run into, I'm just going to call it Main Street of the town.
Sure.
Whenever Trent and Julie are searching. Not Julie, Linda Stiles.
Julia Stiles.
Yeah, Julie Stiles.
Save the last dance, boys.
But no, I mean, I think Carpenter does some interesting things in this one that also feel like, hey, oh shit, this is Carpenter of the 90s. Like,
Sure.
is this a new era of Carpenter? Honestly, you know, I mean, you have his 70s films, which is really Assault on Precinct 13 and Halloween.
Right.
And then out of the gate, like, his next bangers are all in the 80s. So it is a new era for him. And I feel like visually, in the way the film's constructed as a whole, you feel that. You feel like this is a new Carpenter. It's just sad that,
right,
like I said,
where
I think
things
it's
would go on to. Right, absolutely. All right, so where we're at in the story now is things are starting to amp up. We've been introduced to Sutter Kane. Sutter Kane is diabolically progressing things along in the town. The town folk are pointing fingers back at him, and things start to unravel. And Stiles eventually, because she already knows the man, obviously already has a rapport, a relationship, if you will, she feels more compelled to explore things beyond. So even as they go back to the hotel, Sam Neill's character gets kind of spooked out because, you know, the townspeople are kind of the wieldy pitchfork type, right? They got the guns and everything. And, you know, that turns him off. He's like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. He starts making his accusations again about it being staged. She admits it was originally staged, that he would go disappearing.
That's like right after they meet. Right after you meet Sutter Kane, which is this wonderful reveal as the hounds of hell are like storming down the stairs, right?
Right, absolutely.
And she says, yeah, this is how I know you're wrong, because you're half right. This was supposed to be staged, but then
these other things happen.
Learn the twist, yeah.
Right. So now she knows that there's more to see here, which she already speculated, obviously, because she was the one that kind of having these premonitions and visions prior to Sam Neill's character. And now Sam Neill's character is seeing all the craziness going on, so he's starting to open up to the possibilities thereof. And so she kind of stages being ill so that he's distracted, and she runs off. Well, he runs downstairs, and he discovers that the old lady is kind of turning into the thing, if you will, kind of similar practical things going on with the tentacle arms and the accent. Or maybe I jumped the gun. Maybe it's her husband's behind the chained up to like her ankle.
The next scene after you get the reveal, I believe, is when we get an inkling that he's down handcuffed to her.
Yes. Yeah, so the husband is down handcuffed in the floor, so that, you know, the things amp up with Log Lady very quickly. I'm just going to recognize her as such because that's secondly
she is
Grandma
hold on,
and Happy Gilmore, right?
So this is Frances Bay, not to be confused with the Log Lady. She's Mrs. Tremond. She's also in, I think she's also in Blue Velvet. Anyway.
She's in Blue Velvet, and she's also in Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
And Fire Walk with Me, too. Yeah. So she... back to her, she progressively is looking worse and worse. You know, in her appearance, we kind of mentioned earlier, kind of the red under the eyes and that sort of thing. This is very apparent where he starts asking questions about the husband. She's like, oh, no, I don't have a husband, or something to that effect. And so now John Trent's like superstition is at a 10. And Stiles sneaks off to go, I guess, to speak with Sutter Kane herself. And Sutter Kane basically puts the hooks in and sends him on his way, or her way, I should say, to be his agent of chaos, if you will. And so this is where the John Trent character becomes even more important. Even, yes, he's the skeptic and he's rebelling against everything that's happening to him, and it's very evident. And even though Stiles is telling him specifically, like, he wants you, you know, he has a job for you, he has a purpose for you, even before they go off the hotel scene, that is. You know, and then he gets this idea, Sam Neill does, that he's just going to flee the town. And cyclically, they keep going back into the town. Every time he tries to leave the town, some obstacle comes in his way, whether it's, you know, he's traveling through some portal that's bringing him back in, or the first instance is, of course, Stiles is with him, and she starts to come on to him and says, well, he's riding me to kiss you.
Yeah.
And he gets out of the car, he's had enough, and she comes out of the car crab walking. So...
Kane has a job for you.
This is like before, of course, post-Exorcist, but before all the crab walking that takes place in the 2000s in almost every single horror movie. And they do it much better because most of that was CGI, A. Carpenter actually used a contortionist and just put an upside down mask on. So, it has a similar effect, but it looks awkward because obviously the body shouldn't be in those positions. The head shouldn't be turned that way versus how the rest of the body is contorted and so on. So, but yeah, Styles comes out as essentially the start of a Cthulhu-esque monster that you start to see Pantheon going forward, various ones that be revealed more and more so, whether it's quick shots, long panning shots. And then I guess where Sam Neill's character heads into the bar where he meets one of the town folk. And this to me was one of the most...
You mean Vigo the Carpathian?
Yes, Vigo the Carpathian.
Ghostbusters too.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and it is in fact him. So yeah, he goes in to meet this guy, and he acknowledges the fact that he's a character, and Sutter Kane's pulling all the strings. And his only way out, he's discovered as a fictional character, is to apparently blow his brains out with a double barrel shotgun. And this just, amplifies everything in the sense that Sam Neill's character goes and confronts Sutter Kane, and Sutter Kane basically tells him, I have a script for you to deliver. He opens up and sees the blackness of the abyss, of the unknown, and the creatures rising from it.
It's also in a confession booth.
Right.
Which I've always found interesting because it takes place in that church that you see earlier with the Hounds of Hell, right? And the fact that they have this conversation and John Trent goes into a confession booth and Sutter Kane is talking to him and essentially saying, you're going to take this and you're going to deliver it for me.
Right.
I always find that interesting because right above that confession booth is an upside down cross.
Right.
So it's like, oh, fuck, is this the devil and this is the apocalypse? Oh shit, okay, sure. All right.
Yes, and also the fact that the movie opens up with John Trent in the sane asylum, and at one point he's asked, was there any request? And it was one black crown. And he has tons of crosses, mostly upside down, in nature, drawn not only throughout the containing unit itself, but himself as well, looking like Post Malone. With the, so that was kind of entertaining as well. So, but yeah, so to just kind of wrap up what actually happens in the movie, of course, he goes back to town. He goes crazy. He ends up killing folks once he gets back into town that are going to get the new Sutter Kane book. That lands him in an insane asylum. Of course, he finds out, too, after going back to the publisher again before getting arrested, the fact that he did actually deliver the script to him. He had no recollection of it. So he's operating in some type of fugue state. And he really looks exactly like Sutter Kane's former manager as well, once he's kind of reached these plateaus and decides to, he himself axe a man to death and land himself inside of the sane asylum. So it kind of catches us back up to where the movie opened at. And it turns out that it is now the end of the world, if you will, at least from his perspective. And he's allowed to leave the theater. And so he goes out into a desolate land and goes and views the movie. Finally, the movie has been made, and he's the star character. You see it on some of the movie posters as he moves throughout the movie. You see it on the marquee as he goes into the movie theater, that John Trent is the main character.
John Trent is.
Yes, in the mouth of madness. So this thing gets kind of meta. The whole movie's been about him and everything that's happened in the movie to this point, and he's a make-believe character. And of course, yes, that is the case. And it almost, to me, the ending was more of an homage to, it's hard not to look at that and not think just kind of the insane, wide-eyed look and go back to things like A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
For me, anyways, that was the first correlation that I made for me. But this movie largely is, again, we kind of hit on some of these things, is about consumerism. Although not explicitly ever said, to me as a movie watcher, this is what I took from it too, because you have to think about the context of which this movie came out, 1994 basically, into 1995. So we are in the heart still yet of satanic panic, not the birth thereof, but certainly plenty of it going on at this time. And as well as the censorship that's going on in music in particular, and how it's being attacked by parental groups, Tipper Gore taking that charge herself, going and speaking with people in Congress, with people such as Dee Snider, Frank Zappa, people that were speaking out against some of these censorships and things over the years that they were trying to bring to music. And to me, I always took this movie as kind of a response to that. And it was, oh, you think that movies turn people crazy, or you think music turns people crazy? Well, here's a case of that actually happening. And what's funny about it, it kind of turns it back on its head, because it's really pointed again back to that consumerism that we talked about. And it's really the thing that people should be worried about is being obsessed with commercial goods and consumerism versus people enjoying art for what art is. And that was my big takeaway, I feel like, with the movie over the years.
Yeah, I've always wondered if the movie was partially like Carpenter's commentary on fandom for his films.
Sure, that too.
You know, at this point, you know, in the 90s, there's at least a couple of established horror conventions, and this is back in the day when it's usually in LA or in New York. Sometimes in Chicago, the Weekend of Horrors would happen, and they would bring in big guests, and it was usually essentially like Comic-Con for horror films, where it's like, hey, we brought the video trailer for Darkman. We're going to show this to you for the first time. In a way, I think Carpenter's always been an interesting director, right? Like, a lot of genre people love Carpenter, and for good reason. The guy is a great director, but you can tell he has a love for horror. It's not just a genre he works in because he gets the jobs.
Right.
It's something that he feels is important. But when he talks about it, he never almost talks about his movies like horror films or genre films. He really kind of, if anything, he's like, if anything, I'm ripping off of old Westerns and all this other stuff.
Correct.
Or older films like noir films in this case. But, you know, what makes this film so unique is it's unlike Carpenter, but still has that Carpenter kind of, that melody, that voice, if you will. There's a lot of wide shots, there's visual recognitions, but there's a lot of visuals, like we talked about earlier, with tons of flashes.
Yes.
I don't think he really did that with any of his movies prior to that. And this is also a huge effects movie. Like, when you get down to the end of it, it's essentially can be throwing everything at the wall.
Right.
And some of it works, some of it doesn't. And I think the things that don't necessarily work, Carpenter was smart enough to be like, hey, this is great looking, but we have to kind of cut it back a little bit.
Right.
And in a way, he uses the same kind of technique that I think Lovecraft uses, is like, hey, be somewhat descriptive, but let the imagination take a hold, because that's what's going to frighten people. And I think there's a lot of like interesting technical things about this film that I feel like dismissing this film in the 90s was kind of disjustice to it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because this is a really great film. Even if somebody said, hey, this wasn't a John Carpenter film, you could maybe buy that and be like, oh yeah, there's not a lot of Carpenter staple. It doesn't, in a weird way, it doesn't even feel or look like Carpenter's previous works other than the anamorphic lenses. But he does a lot of medium shots. He does a lot of close-up shots.
Right.
And that's something he never really did. A lot of Carpenter's stuff was really kind of theatrical in a way where, like, everything's staged and he's utilizing that wide frame for a reason. This one kind of feels, and this is not a knock on it, but it feels standard. It feels like, oh, it's a director that wants to shoot in this format, but he doesn't do a lot of visual trickery. Like, even one of my favorite visual signatures of Carpenter, as I'm sure other people, is really the lens flares.
Yeah.
And as much people will bitch about the J.J. Abrams stuff, right?
Sure.
But Carpenter, his visual flares look natural, number one.
Right.
Number two, they're not the main focus of a shot. They're an embellishment of a shot.
Right.
You know, they're an exaggeration. It's a style.
Right.
And you don't even see that in here. Like, there are plenty of shots where the headlights are full on camera and he doesn't focus on like, oh, I want to make this a really cool beam. He's like, yeah, whatever. So there's not a lot of visual trickery as far as like what Carpenter was known for in the 70s and the 80s. I would say more so the 80s. I think 80s is really his visual composition storytelling, where he's like evolving and using all the different techniques. In the Mouth of Madness is pretty standardly shot. But where it's interesting is, like, when I was talking about it before, the beginning of it, very kind of muted color palette, lots of beiges, lots of browns. By the end of it, like, you get to that bar scene that we talked about earlier, that's pretty much all fucking red and black. You can tell, like, obviously your brain is subconsciously absorbing this, and you're like, oh shit, things are like way different now, but they're really not. There's just more color, there's more red, there's more. It's just a really interesting play. It's almost like, I know I mentioned the textbook screenplay thing. I think there's also textbook like filmmaking in here, that even though it is John Carpenter and I think his voice is on the film, and like I said, I don't want the standard term that I'm using to be a negative reflection, because Carpenter's voice is loud and clear in this, and I think without Carpenter it would have probably been a completely different movie.
Right.
But you could say that about any fucking movie, right?
For sure.
I think I love the dark humor that's in this, which was something we were seeing from the mid-80s onward. We were starting, like, once you got past The Thing,
Right.
it's almost like he had to have the worst fucking experience with a studio.
Right.
And then he got a sense of humor about things.
Right. I know. Right.
But yeah, I think it is a very good film from the 90s. I think it is a highlight of the 90s. I know, like, shit, I was a horror fan in the 90s, and even in the 2000s, people said the fucking 90s sucked. I know there's a movie that says the 90s horror. There's a lot of great stuff in the 90s, and I think this is one of the best 90s films.
Yeah, I liked it the first time I saw it. I couldn't tell you when. My dad was a huge John Carpenter fan, so just any time a Carpenter movie came out, it was in the house. There were certain times in our lives that we weren't well enough to go to theaters, so a lot of, we had to wait till things come out on VHS. And in particular with this film, it very quickly went to VHS because it did not, get the theatrical success that the studio was hoping for. This was one of those where later on New Line would do direct to VHS movies and then on to do direct to DVD, which is entirely its own market as well. But they would even do it with, like, franchise characters and stuff, some movies that you would not think now present day, especially whenever you see these movie packs and these iconic horror figures. Yeah, even some of them had some, direct releases like that. A couple other things I wanted to hit on with the film too, of course, and Brandon had actually started to touch on kind of like the frantic nature and obsession of the John Trent character. I think there's certainly an allegory could be made for addiction. One is to assume, especially in the scenes at which, he's starting to take the job, starting to read the books. He's drinking heavily. He's pounding some whiskey and shit. Yeah, so like he's obviously there could be so much of a backstory about John Trent's character. One thing I appreciate about this movie too is Sam Neill just was his accent. He was his New Zealand accent. He wasn't trying to put on an accent. I've heard people critique this film and say that Sam Neill's accent changes throughout the movies, and I don't agree with that. It's just more prominent in some places, and it depends on the emotionality of the performance, which would be the case in real life. So I don't have a problem with any of that. Sam Neill is the star of this movie. Sam Neill makes this movie. I mean, I'm sure we could probably pull some other actors out of our hats just because we're film buffs and put them in that role, and the film still works. However, at the time, based on the decisions made, he is the guy for the role. He makes this film. Without him, I don't know that I enjoy the film the same, personally.
No, I mean, I think he's definitely an anchor to the visual storytelling as well as narratively, right? He needs to be this identifiable guy. He can be an asshole. We probably prefer him to be an asshole because he's sarcastic as fuck, and we kind of like that.
100%.
He is the guy that you want to be. If I was investigating a huge fucking publishing company and they're like coming to me, oh yeah, we lost our best author and he's got a book.
Yeah.
We're going to send you out there, try to find him. I'm like, so the news picks up on it. Okay. I would play into it.
For sure.
I would fucking rip them apart.
Absolutely.
But it would be fun.
100%.
And I like that he plays that, and he's believable because I think Sam Neill, one of his greatest strengths is he's just this relatable everyday guy.
100%.
And I mean, I know that position or that criteria or characterism isn't necessarily in possession, but it kind of also is, right? Because we have to identify and maybe sympathize, empathize with him immediately.
100%.
So how do we do that? Well, it's Sam Neill. And I think Sam Neill's just always been one of those actors that you just click with him. You know where this guy's coming from. There's just different variations of his character. But for the most part, I feel like Sam Neill plays Sam Neill.
Yeah. He's definitely a guy who puts on the skin of that character and conveys it so naturally that, to your point, it's noticeably Sam Neill every time. But I talk about this frequently whenever I go see a movie. Sometimes I have an issue with an actor playing an iconic role or maybe not a so well-known actor or a good actor playing iconic roles. I can argue it either way. So last year, whenever we did our year-end film reviews, and this is the example I'll call back to, I talked about how Leonardo DiCaprio's acting performance in Killers of the Flower Moon would forget that was Leonardo DiCaprio. Although I know it's Leonardo DiCaprio, it's obviously him, but the way he talked, his mannerisms, just everything about him, he was so ingrained in that character. I love getting lost into actors' roles like that. Sam Neill is that caliber of actor where it's him in this role. It's hard not to see him, but also at the same time, he takes you on that journey and you forget.
Yeah.
So he's definitely that guy. We're basically hitting on just kind of quick notes of things that work up for the film for us. Just a couple of the randos I had, Andy. We mentioned it before, but the practical effects of this movie. And you and I can speak to this, having, the Shot Factory versions of it, one of the better restoration. I guess it is the best version of the film that's out there, technically.
Yeah, for sure.
They still hold up. The only thing
Yeah.
to me that didn't hold up, again, I mentioned it earlier, was kind of the mask thing. It is what it is, but outside of that, the monsters, the creatures, the cosmic beings, the otherworldly figures, the unimaginable horrors, they are terrifying. That paired with the lighting, and you never see them for any too long length of time, so it leaves the imagination to linger even with that long tunnel shot where they're running up after him and he's running out of the tunnel.
Yep.
That's
the
a highlight.
Special feature that's on there, right? It's like home movies.
Yes.
And I think they're straight from Greg Nicotero's. It looks like so fucking cheesy and awful. But what's great is, it looks like that on set, but through the lighting and through the lens and how we knock down the light, this is going to look dark enough, but you can make shit out. And what I like about it is there's flashes of it, and there's obviously echoes of flashes throughout the whole film, whether it's the axe violence and the blood splattering on the wall, or just light flashes, which I've kind of always equated to like portals.
Yes.
Because that happens when they go over the bridge, which is when they enter the story.
Ultimately, the Cthulhu monsters chase him out into a dimension, and he ends up on the road toward the end.
Right. So there's interesting stuff, and there's like an interesting world that's built in here that nobody seems to really talk about. Yes. And I think that's probably one of the most interesting things about it, and maybe the most Lovecraftian thing about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the practical effects we highlighted, but actually, again, back to the visual effects, very stagey at the time, how it was being used in films overall. But Carpenter knew how to shoot it and it not to be laughable, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
The Sutter Kane character, of course, in the movie poster, was most prominently whenever he rips back and opens up to the void. And that's kind of the big scene that always sticks out to me in this, and how it's used. It's used very well. And even the more modern restoration of the film, it did not look overly hokey or cheesy. I mean, it's obviously infant
it's
CGI.
Obviously from this, right? But it blends a lot better. And I think that's just to ILM's credit. They were the best visual artists out there.
Right.
I mean, no doubt. Like, they knew exactly, like, oh, you only have this much money? Well, we can do this, but we will blend it in a way that it doesn't stick out. It's not like, oh, I made this graphic and I'm not going to render this with your natural lighting environments or anything.
Right.
We're just going to put it on there.
Absolutely.
That's what a lot of 90s CG did.
Yeah, I know. And boy, some of that stuff still to this day, not great.
No.
Cosmic horror elements, of course. We've mentioned it several times. Lovely. Love it. Love every bit of it. Obviously, all the homages to H.P. Lovecraft, that's the huge driving force and inspiration into this. Obviously, there's some homages and love for Stephen King. Brandon brought up the Clive Barker thing. That didn't ever stick with me, but I like the idea of it, especially some of the, again, if we're getting back into that discussion.
Maybe because of the chains?
There is a bit of that, yeah, for sure. I think where he kind of does hit the nail on the head with that recommendation is just the hysteria that was around Clive Barker at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you actually ever watched an interview with the guy, he seemed like the nicest guy in the world. It was so weird that he would even come up with these things. And I was a big fan of his artwork as well. I kind of like that alternative style. And I think that personally, we've bonded over this in the past, Andy, our love for Converge and Jacob Bannon.
Yeah.
I think Jacob Bannon gets a lot of inspiration from Clive Barker's artwork in particular as well. Sure. You can see a lot of that in his graphic design. So you're always going to be a big fan of that stuff. So anytime I can talk about Clive Barker, I'll consider it as success. Those are the big things to me that I loved and stood out to me with the film.
Yeah.
And complimenting some of the things that you guys pointed out as well. Was there anything else that you loved about the film you wanted to point out?
No, I mean, obviously when you're talking about a Carpenter film, more than likely the man did the soundtrack for it, or the score, I should say.
Right.
This one's interesting because there was a short stint when he did like a collaboration with this guy named Jim Lang, who's actually this Kansas City composer.
Yeah.
Yeah. He did the kind of like music work on Body Bags, which is what they shot, I think, right before this.
It is.
Which was a Showtime failed pilot, so it's been released as a movie. On video, and Shot Factory also, or Screen
with
Factory
Toby Hooper, we should mention.
Yeah, Toby Hooper, John Carpenter, Stacy Keach is in it, Debbie Harry, there's cameo appearances, Wes Craven. It's a really good anthology movie. So I would highly recommend that, especially because of Halloween time.
Absolutely.
But I think one of my favorite scenes, I don't know if you do this, but when I watch a movie, sometimes Like when you know it's a good movie, it's like, can I take a scene out of context and place that in front of somebody and be like, look at how fucking cool this movie is. Like maybe it's the peak of the movie, maybe it's not. Maybe I think it's a good highlight reel. And I did that for a long time. I still kind of do it. One of my favorite clips of the movie, and I think it was actually clipped and put on like maybe some Windows 95 machines or something. But it's when Styles is reading from the book.
Yes.
In the Sutter Kane office, which is like red and black.
Yes.
And it's got a glowing red to it. And then there's that pulsating door that's wet and it's got chains. And then you have the rip. And from that rip was when you talked about where Sutter Kane rips it. And it's this void. Well, Trent stares at the void and like we're watching this happen and she's reading it as it's happening.
Right.
And I love like the visual look of him just looking and you just see the pages of the book flapping in the wind. And I'm like, fuck, that's just such a great, strong visual.
Yeah.
And I think if you take it out of context, the fact that she's reading what is happening on screen, I think that that's still a powerful scene, powerful clip that I love, like just showing kind of out of context. Like, I know you said, how would you sell somebody on watching this movie, right?
Yeah.
That's one of my little techniques is like, how about I show you a scene?
Yeah.
And you tell me if it's like showing a trailer.
Right.
But I always feel like, hey, why don't you do that? Because films are a visual medium. So it's like, why don't you do this?
So actually, I want to piggyback off of that to a very valid point that I think is very important for me to make about this movie. And that is, oddly, I kind of see this as a spiritual companion to Videodrome, which is funny because I had you, and I didn't do this on purpose. You were here last year doing Videodrome with me. And of course, some of the social commentary that's there in both films, number one. Two, the batshit craziness of it. Three, would this even get made again today and how would it get made and how it would be received? Four, some of the body horror stuff as well. So to go back to your point about taking a scene from the movie, for me, that scene would be whenever Styles goes and explores the state of Sutter Kane and what's going on there and I guess try to advocate to him or whatever that I guess motive is for her character.
Yeah.
She gets shown the ending of the book, so he shoves her face into the book, and just how that's handled and the flashes of everything, just how the violent imagery, and then her eyes start to bleed, which is something that you see in the characters throughout the movie as well as the stories progress along. Particularly whenever the new book's read, everybody comes out with bleeding eyes once In the Mouth of Madness is done, and then that cuts to you think she's about to make out with him, but it's not really that. It's the demonic like Cthulhu-esque parasitic twin that's on the back of Sutter Kane that she's massaging.
I was trying to come up with the word. It's Kato and Cthulhu. If we could combine that somehow.
Yeah, somehow.
That's what it was.
For sure. Yeah, to me that was very, I guess the first thing I thought I should say would be David Cronenberg universe, like maybe Naked Lunch-ish, like am I on a fucking LSD trip right now? That it kind of gave me that same feeling whenever I saw that.
Yeah.
So yeah, weirdly, I kind of see this as a spiritual companion. Andy, I got another question for you.
Yeah.
Is there something about this movie that does not work for you? Just out of curiosity. Or is there something that if you had a second take, maybe you would, take a swing at differently?
I still like the main theme, but I also hate it at the same time because it's so obvious that you're trying to do Enter Sandman.
Right.
And I think I read on the Wikipedia somewhere that like John Carpenter tried to get Enter Sandman and they wouldn't allow it, which I believe because for a long time Metallica didn't want
to license their music.
Yeah, they didn't want to. Now they're like licensing it. I'm like, okay, John, come on, man. Like you've come up with some iconic scores. Why does this sound like Enter Sandman?
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that is I think he also had Dave Davies from the Kinks work on that. And I don't think Dave got credited. And I don't know if you know this, but remember when Carpenter was like touring?
Yes.
I mean, he's part of the band, but there's Daniel Davies, which is related. Yeah.
Right. I think
so.
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting because I think that's the start of that relationship.
Yeah, and I also think this is the start of Carpenter's son as well, Cody, being involved in any of Carpenter's work is with this film as well. I think he has like a musical credit or something.
I remember that.
And I know it's relative. was not paying attention fully whenever I was investigating this. I know it was relative to the Carpenters scene cutaway inside of the insane asylum, because it was supposed to be kind of like a play on, oh, they ruined the Carpenters for me also, you know. I don't remember if he just had a quick cameo there or if it was involved with the soundtrack itself. Now, iconically, he does music with his son, obviously.
Right.
They toured doing live performances of In the Mouth of Madness. Back to some of the points we've been making about the score as well. So Carpenter actually brought in the gentleman from Kansas City, Jim Lang, on purpose, because, and his thinking behind that, whenever I had saw an interview with him, was that he wanted somebody more formally trained to approach the score for whatever. He didn't really explain it.
Yeah.
And he just wanted to come in and improvise on it. And he's an improvisational scorer of film. And he was talking about how his dad was musically trained and a musician himself. And that's just kind of how he likes to approach things, is more improvisational.
Yeah.
And, he's not really a note for note player, if you will. I mean, that's kind of what makes Carpenter who he is and makes his films what they are. So yeah, I'm with you kind of on the score aspect of it.
The rest of the score is great.
Yeah.
And I wish that I don't think it's available on vinyl. I don't even know if it's available. I want to say maybe it might be available on CD, but it is kind of odd to me because I still consider it, even though I hate that song.
Yeah, I don't care for it.
I still
it's very
consider it like an iconic Carpenter.
When I was doing teasers for the movies that we were doing, I really wanted to use music from all of the movies, but I just could not with that one, personally. So I chose something off of his horror themes more recently, the albums that he's been doing with his sons. So I could not, in good faith, use the actual main theme whenever I posted your poster on my stories. I was like, it just does not fit the mood of the movie for me. I just can't do it. It was like a turd that I did not want to pass.
It's not great. It's not great.
To me, really the only other problem, I guess, again, if I was going to be nitpicky, the Lyndall Stiles character, very stagey, daytime soapish at times with those deliveries.
At times, yeah.
Very campy, but then other times she's great. She kind of goes in and out of it. I think whenever they really get into the shit is when her acting chops really start to show off. It's kind of that introductory phase of her character. She's a little bland and flat, and so could have maybe improved the performance there. But again, just trying to find things to critique.
I think she does a good job for the most part, but I will agree, like, there are scenes where she's shaky, it feels phoned in, or it feels empty. It doesn't feel authentic. And, I don't know, like, I don't think she had tons of experience, but I know I want to say she did some movie right before this.
As far as feature film experience, she doesn't have a ton. Again, it's mostly like TV, like prominent television of the 80s and 90s. So I know in the 90s she did shit like
Airwolf. It was Airwolf.
Yeah, it was close to that.
But no, I mean, look, I'm not saying she's an incompetent actress, but against like Sam Neill, who's really playing it straight, but he's believable.
Right.
You kind of have to be a steady frequency.
Definitely.
And there are some scenes where, it feels phoned in, it feels empty, or it feels overplayed or like overdramatic. But then there are scenes that it works. And I think at the end of the day, her performance for the most part just works. There's just, if you get nitpicky, there's some scenes, like especially the pivotal scene where she's like, it was supposed to be a staged thing. Some of her inflections are staged.
Yes, absolutely.
Hey.
Aha! So I think we've already made the point that the critics weren't right on this, so I'm not going to hammer that on beyond anymore. Obviously, we're fans of the film. We're covering it. We're talking about it here now for 2 hours. Where would you rank this in Carpenter's filmography?
Shit, I knew you were going to do this.
I got to ask you that. And if you got to think about it for a second, I can go ahead and rip mine, because I've got it.
Rip yours.
Okay, so
let's hear yours.
For me, number one film for Carpenter is The Thing. It can't not be. It's my wife's favorite movie of all time. It's probably in my top 10. It's always hard for me. I'm always like changing my top 10. I don't know that it's in my top 5, but definitely probably top 10 movie of all time for me. Halloween, obviously for its importance, it has to be at number 2. Not that it's, no slump either. Amazing movie. The best of the Halloween franchise, of course. They never made one as good as the first. And obviously a lot of that has to do with Carpenter himself, in my opinion. They Live. I love They Live. Huge Roddy Piper fan, personally. I think he knocked it out of the park. He was such an unknown to be put in that role at the time. If you were a wrestling fan, you knew what he could do.
Oh, yeah.
But, Roddy Piper, man, just absolutely love that man, everything that he ever did. And he's fantastic in that. Great acting, some of the best quotable lines in a movie ever. And I agree with you. It should be in this apocalyptic filmography, if you will, or run of his movies.
Well,
I see it more so. I actually would make the argument that, and again, Prince of Darkness fits too, but for me, spirit-wise and the pacing of the movies, Prince of Darkness is very slow at the beginning, particularly at the beginning. Whereas The Thing is not like that. The Thing gets into the shit pretty quick. It's already, like a 12 Little Indians, Agatha Christie type, whodunit sort of thing, right away. That moves very quickly. I would actually make the argument that it is The Thing they live in this movie.
I could buy that.
So I actually see that. I would probably oust Prince of Darkness on that one. So I said They Live. Big Trouble Little China has tons of nostalgia for me. Grew up on that movie. Love it to no end. All the campiness and over-the-top craziness with it. Kurt Russell, an all-time favorite actor. Speaking of Kurt Russell, I'd probably put this on par with Escape from New York. Somewhere I could go back and forth on that. Escape from New York I was introduced to, and that was one of the first movies, possibility of a near future type thing to me, that I was like, hey, there's a whole genre of movies like this, and this is really cool. You could do this differently or that differently, or you can explore these worlds. And then later would go on to do Escape from LA, which is not quite as good, but I still enjoyed. And then right behind this certainly would be Assault on Precinct 13, The Fog, Starman, I actually like quite a bit. And then Prince of Darkness, probably, to round out of 10.
This is tough. So I know Halloween's going to be at number 1.
I can make the argument for 1 for me as well.
It could very well be any of the other films. That's the hard thing is, I feel like my top 5 Carpenters could be interchangeable depending on a mood, except for Halloween, because that was one of my gateway horror films. I feel like that is one of the foundation blocks of me. If you took that out, I don't know how I would work.
Unfortunately, Halloween, the first Halloween, was not the first Halloween movie that I saw growing up. So I didn't have a very high worth on the charts of it. And then I saw that. I'm like, okay, well, I get it. And
which one did you see?
The first one I saw, I believe.
Resurrection?
This is my memory of first. No, that was the second. The first one was the Paul Rudd one.
Okay.
Where it opens up in the and I think that was one of the direct release ones, if memory serves me correct. But it opens up in a cathedral.
It did come out in the theaters, though.
Okay,
it did come out in the theaters, but it had more success on home video, and plus, I think they had some extra scenes on video or something.
Okay,
they did some sort of video exclusive with it for sure.
Yeah, not great, not a great one.
So yeah, Halloween number 1. Number 2 is probably The Thing.
You're
number
a big
3
Christine guy, though.
Number 3 is Christine for me. Number 4 is probably Escape from New York, because I feel, at that point, guilty it's not above number 4.
Right.
Then probably The Fog.
The Fog is great.
And then They Live, Big Trouble in Little China. I don't know, man. I do like In the Mouth of Madness a lot, but is it above They Live?
No, I don't think so.
Big Trouble in Little China, maybe, for me. Because for whatever reason, as much as I love Big Trouble in Little China, I didn't really grow up with that movie a lot. And I think it was because, somebody told me, oh, it's not a horror movie. It's kind of more action fantasy. And I'm like, oh, I don't want that. I need horror.
Sure.
So I think I saw it on HBO or something. I'm like, oh yeah, this is fun and goofy, but
It was definitely a movie from the mid 90s into the early 2000s that was constantly on TV. So
yeah.
And to me, it's one of those comfort movies that you can just put on anytime and watch it from that point on and be invested in it still. So that's why I got a lot of love for BTLC.
Honestly,
baby.
Yeah, I think Assault on Precinct 13 would maybe even be above Big Trouble in Little China for me.
I do love that a lot. I remember when the new one was about to come out, my dad's like, oh, that's a remake of a Carpenter movie. And I'm like, really? And he went and rented it so I could watch it. And I was like, oh, wow.
And the remake's good, too.
The remake's solid. Yeah, I think it's actually one of those cases that you can make it's better than what you would think.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a friend of mine. I'm not a huge fan of Prince of Darkness either. I don't know what it is. I think it's a lot of
I want to like
it, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I want to like it a lot, but
And Starman's a movie that I have not seen in a long time.
I actually just got a pristine VHS copy of it whenever I went antique diving a couple months ago.
Nice.
So I am going to bust that out on VHS.
Ready.
Yes, that is the next VHS watch for sure.
I don't think we mentioned that Hayden Christensen.
Oh yeah, we gotta mention that. God damn, how did I forget that?
He is the Paperboy.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. Yeah.
I thought we were going to go there, and then Brandon was so short on time. I'm like, all right, we'll just let this pass.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We got to mention that before we wrap things up. Yeah, Hayden Christensen, man. I believe that's one of his first credits, if not his first. Yeah.
I think it is his first credit. Yeah, honestly, that kid creeped me out. I think what creeped me out about that is when you do visual tie-ins with things, it kind of evokes a response out of me, and I'm very, I don't want to say delicate or sensitive about it, but it seems like I pick up on things and then I have an association with it. So when I saw this kid riding a bike, of course I rode a bike. I rode my bike all the fucking time.
Same.
I saw the cards on the spokes, which is something that I never did, but I wanted to, and the only reason I wanted to was because of it. And when I saw that, I'm like, shit, you know what this could also be an allegory for is Americana going away and becoming a perversion of America,
for sure,
and becoming an abomination of America, which just really eats itself. And, you know, I mean, you can maybe run with that theory because there are close-ups of like the Joker card and all this other stuff. And like, as far as I know, that technique of close pinning the cards was just really a noisemaker to let people know that you're coming, or, you know, let drivers aware of it. But it's a tradition that came from the 50s, as far as I know.
Yeah. Which is also a funny thing to think about how loud fucking car engines were at the time, and how the fuck you going to hear a car clacking, you know?
So now that they quiet down the cars, I guess you don't have to have the cards.
We talked about the budget issues that kind of were notorious with this filmmaking, and it kind of had to cut back things at the very end. So that's kind of why the ending was what it was, actually. And, you know, he being John Trent, the Sam Neill character, went into a post-apocalyptic world to just watch the movie himself, and really made things extra meta with the entire film, which actually I would argue is way more effective than anything else that they would have done as far as current trends at the time or force feeding.
I agree.
Because it was so contrarian versus everything else. So, you know, whenever, you know, other films of the time were going balls to the wall and overstimulating folks, this just left a lot to the imagination and left you toiling. And I like films that are a little bit more introspective like that.
I also like, I don't think it should come as a surprise. I like films that take place in film theaters, or film theaters, you know, scenes of film theaters and people watching movies. And I love the idea that like it is obviously the world has gone to hell outside, and he walks by a movie theater, sees his face on a poster, and is like, what's this? Gets popcorn and comes into the movie theater just to see what has allegedly just happened to him in like this weird clip form, which I assume he is watching just the whole fucking movie.
Sure.
But I also love how it's clipped together, because it is supposed to put you in the same mindset that he is. Like when it just keeps repeating, this is not reality. This is not reality.
Right.
This is reality.
Right.
And he just fucking, it's funny because it's like, oh my God. But I love that he just kind of loses his shit. And I love that it takes place in the movie theater and we are watching a movie. And if, you know, you saw it in the original theatrical run, you were in a movie theater watching somebody in a movie theater going mad. I love that.
And I also think with that ending too, the power that's in it too is, of course, the first that you see of him is being drugged into the insane asylum. And this starts to change as Dr. Red interviews him, but eventually he says that he doesn't want to leave. And it's quite the contrary compared to how the film opened up, and you wonder why. And I think the ending drives this point home is the fact that he does realize that he is a fictitious character in the story. Somebody else is pulling the strings, and he doesn't want his story to end.
Right.
And so there's an element of hanging on to the, you know,
well, he doesn't want to end up like that guy.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
He's like, I don't want to blow my brains out. How about I just stay here and give you a conflict as the puppet master?
Absolutely. So I think there's a little bit of like resistance for what his ultimate destination is, which kind of adds to the power of that ending too, really, when you think about it, I think. So, Andy, I think we're to the point that we need to start talking about some Destroy the Brain events. So I know that you guys have, which I made the mistake of just kind of passerby initially seeing the post and thinking, oh, they're going to show the Trick or Treat of, 2000. This is not, in fact, that movie. This is a different Trick or Treat, of course.
No, this is the rock and roll Trick or Treat from 1987. This is a film that, funny story. So there was one of the Release the Hounds benefits that the Lion's Daughter does for Stray Rescue. One of the things was I was going to, I think the prize that I gave up was like, hey, you get the opportunity to like work with me to book a movie. And this girl, Manuela, won, and I'm trying to remember what fucking movie we ended up showing. But she wanted the Dino De Laurentiis catalog, like Near Dark and stuff. And I'm like, I've already been down this road because I've been trying to get Trick or Treat because Rick from Lion's Daughter has been bugging me every fucking year. He's like, hey, when are you going to show this? So secret that I kept for 2 years ago, I found out the rights were available. I'm like, oh, fuck. But the problem is there's no really great source. There's a horrible DVD cover that is pretty notoriously known among media collectors where it's got Ozzy Osbourne and Gene Simmons, and it looks like, a 90s haunted house ad. And it just says Trick or Treat in like really shitty font, like Halloween font, right? The drippy font. Yeah. So a lot of people didn't take chances on it. And the only people really singing the praises of the film were people that got to see it either on video, they took a chance on it because the VHS artwork was a little better, where they saw it in the theater. Like, I think Rick said he's seen it during its original theatrical run like multiple times. Wow. So he's gonna maybe be there both nights. I don't know. But he'd been bugging me for years, and like I said, 2 years ago I found that, and I'm like, okay, the source. Now we got to work on that. So I knew Synapse Films was performing a restoration, but I still do not know when that disc is coming out. I kind of know what's going on, but I'm not going to talk about it. All I can tell you is the restoration work of the film is done, and we worked out an agreement to essentially get access to that, and that's what we're showing. Yeah. So it's going to be a 4K restoration of the film in 5.1 sound. As much as, like, I'm not the hugest fan of Gene Simmons as a person, he's actually pretty fucking good in this movie. He plays a Radio Shock DJ, and he develops a really good, like, relationship with the lead character. And then Ozzy Osbourne just plays the opposite. He's like a preacher man. But essentially, what I also love about this film, and even though Rick doesn't think the same way, I challenge anybody to watch Trick or Treat from 1986, is the one we're talking about again, and Brain Scan. They're the same fucking movie. One is about music, one is about media and video games, and it's the same goddamn movie. I shit you not. And I love Brain Scan.
Nice.
But I also love Trick or Treat as well.
Yeah. So I actually have not seen Trick or Treat, and I was really upset once I realized, okay, well, this is not the one I thought it was, because I'm not really a big fan of the Sam Trick or Treat movie, personally. It didn't land with me when it first came out. I eventually rewatched it. I was like, this is better than the credit that I gave it initially.
Yeah.
Because I kind of passively watched it the first time, to be honest with you. I was probably trying to make out with some girl or something, to be honest with you. Yeah, at the time, Teenage Barrett. But anywho.
Dirty dog.
Yeah, dirty dog. But back to this. So then I discovered it wasn't that. And I was like, oh shit, I've never seen this. It'd be great to actually see it. And then I realized Furnace Fest. I'm at Furnace Fest that weekend. I'm like, God damn it. Why?
Which, I mean, that's pretty cool though.
It's cool because it's the last one. So there's not going to be another one. So there's that.
Honestly, if Converge was on that, I probably would have done that as well.
Believe me, I wish.
So I'm going to rewind and announce our new thing that we decided to do. So we're going to team up with our friends at Four Hands, and we're going to show, we've curated 3 movies for them this October, and they're going to show it at the tap room for free. It's on a Tuesday night at like 7 o'clock, so it's not, you won't be too late. October 1st will be Shaun of the Dead. Then October 15th will be Grabbers. So we started doing a bar theme, if you could get it. And then the last one, we threw that out, and we were like, oh, Four Hands. And we said Idle Hands because it's like the 25th anniversary of that movie. And I think it's a great Halloween movie. It's not too serious. It's fun. And I feel like Devon Sawa does his best Bruce Campbell impression, maybe even better. The Bruce Campbell, physical workout shit. I love that movie. I think it's a lot of fun. So those are totally free events. We'll have more information on our site. We'll also be shooting it over our hotline, which you could join by texting Conjure at 866-521-4666. Text the word Conjure to that. And we'll kind of keep you abreast of like all the things that we're doing. And obviously October is a huge month for us. So October 1st, we'll do the Four Hands thing. October 4th and 5th is when we're doing Trick or Treat. I've already fielded private messages. People are asking me about the disc. Again, I have no fucking clue when that movie's coming out on home video. It is going to happen. I just know
they just don't do 4K restorations for the hell of it.
There's extras that are kind of holding it up. Yeah. So, but yeah, the movie looks great. I kind of previewed it on my computer. It looks great. It's the best it's ever looked. Because the movie's always kind of had this hazy look to it. So I was really interested to see how they would restore it. But to be quite honest, Synapse Films also kind of did a similar restoration with Prom Night, which also has that like Vaseline on the lens look. It's very odd. So yeah, 4th and 5th, Trick or Treat, 10 p.m. at Marcus de Pere 14 Cinema. $10 to get you in the door. I will say if you're planning on going, go on Saturday maybe, because Friday's already pretty much like filling up. There are some seats available. I don't want to discourage anybody, but if you need help to guide you into whichever night you want to go, Saturday's looking better. And then that following Friday night on the 11th is our final horror trivia night of the year. This is essentially our Destroy the Brain Halloween party. We have tons of fun. You know, the worst case scenario, if you lose, you're going to walk away with like a list of movies to go check out for the season. Right. We typically put together a letterbox list that will have every film that we referenced in the game. We do a round where basically we see how long you can say "my God" in the tradition of Troll 2.
Oh my God!
I think the record was like 127 or something.
I feel like on a good night I might be able to top it.
Well, you have to see if you can get out of the house.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a Friday night. Now, I know Jeremy also mentioned like our next horror trivia night next year. He said that Friday, or I think it's a Thursday, February 13th. I think he's going to do some sort of My Bloody Valentine kind of tie-in.
Nice.
Yeah, October 11th, horror trivia night. You can sign up your team. It's $10 for the whole team. You can have up to 5 players, so $2 per person if you do that. HorrorTriviaNight.com is where you register. And everybody that registers will also send out a blast out because I think we're going to do some dead giveaways this year, which is essentially us giving the answers out through social media.
Yeah.
Some of the answers.
You can't give them all.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we can't give them all. But yeah, I'm sure there will be candy. There will be.
I really want to do the horror trivia night at some point, and me and Buddy, friend of the show, sister brother podcast, however you want to put that. It's just 2 movies. Danny King. I feel like we would make a good team.
Danny's made it out before.
Yeah, I know he had mentioned he went to one before, and he really had a good time. And the 11th, I am seeing David Cross at Delmar Hall.
Shit. Okay.
So, yeah, going there with the wife.
Well, it's funny because you're wearing the gel shirt, and I'm like, fuck, I wanted to see them, but I went to go see Fabio Frizzi.
Oh, nice. Yeah. That was the same night. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
I was like, son of a bitch.
Bought the gel tickets, and then I saw the ad go up for that, the live performance, and I was like, God damn it, I kind of wish I went to that instead. And then
it was cool.
I forgot about it, and then I saw people like, I'm going to go see this tomorrow, and Kenny was printing some shirts and stuff for Fester, and I was like, for Possession Press, and I'm like, God damn it, now I kind of wish I went to this, and then I ended up going to the show and having a great time. It was like my favorite show of the year that I've been to, so
yeah, I really wanted to see Gel because
they're great.
I was going to go see Lorna Shore. I think I'm skipping that. Well, I know I'm skipping that. We're having a party instead.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I was going to fly solo for that anyway.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was, like, the only band I was interested in seeing really was Sanguisuga Bog, personally. I got friends that are into...
I mean, I like Lorna Shore. I really like... I do like the Pain Remains album as an album.
I've heard that it's good. I just have not ever given it a chance, personally.
Yeah.
You know?
But no, I think the band you turned me on to was Thou, for sure.
Oh,
like, I've heard them before, but, like, when I heard you use their songs for the All Day Grindhouse, I'm like, fuck, this album rips. And at first I was like, oh, I'm old. How long has this been out? Oh, it was actually, like, a day.
It literally, it dropped the day before, and that's all I had been listening to. So that I was probably on, like, my 4th or 5th listen when I was driving up to De Pere, because I live down in, like, Bismarck, Missouri. So it's like an hour and 15-minute drive for me. So I got to go through the album 2 times in a row, almost completely through. And then the times that I went out to the car briefly, I just went out and listened to another Thou song and then came back in. So, like, I was heavy in that album. Don't be surprised if it's not on the top 10, top 5, top 3 for me at the end of the year.
It's one of my favorite albums of the year so far.
It is so
I'm excited to hear the new chat pile. But yeah, no, I fucking love Umbilical. That's a great album.
So good. Those guys know how to just, like, record the most heavy tones, and it translates still to where it's not unbearably, like, bottoming out on the sound of the listening experience. So I got to throw out, I did Destiny's Spawn was another band that I was not familiar with, wasn't on my radar until I went to the Gel show. They were second in order, and I was already familiar with MS Paint, which I'm a fan of them as well. But Destiny's Spawn was the big surprise to me. They were great. Denver, Colorado, hardcore punk band. I highly recommend them. I actually bought their album that came out last year. I totally missed it somehow. It's on Convulsive Records, which all those bands are on, with the exception of Gel just left Convulsive and went to Blue Grape, I believe, the same label that Code Orange is on now. But yeah, man, super, like, Destiny's Bond, super underrated. Not enough people talking about them. I'll sing their praises all day long. Got to throw out a shout out to Destiny's Bond for sure.
Nice.
So just to wrap things up on my end of things, what's in the pipeline for the Halloween program? Of course, you guys know that we do it big. I've got like 6 different events planned for October. I always am like, I'm going to scale it back this year. And then I'm like, it's Halloween. Let's go crazy.
Never happens.
Folks. Yeah, exactly. So this is getting things kicked off for us. Things are not really going sequentially with time. So today, of course, we covered In the Mouth of Madness for its 30th anniversary. Next week, I'm going to be speaking, or next episode, I should say, with Brennan Wilkinson of Squint, St. Louis hardcore band, putting St. Louis on the map, the hardcore scene on the map on Sunday Drive Records. These guys, I don't know if I'm telling tales out of school, but they're about to go very, very big. They've recorded with one of the more prominent producers right now that just did the new Drug Church album. These guys are blowing up. Brennan's a nice guy. We had him on earlier this year, and then I mixed it up with him at the Space Show at the Sinkhole, and we hung out for quite a bit, got to talking, and I think we're going to have a lot in the conversation. They're just coming back from Europe. So they just did a European tour. So looking forward to that conversation with Brennan. It's going to be an ominous artist spotlight. And of course, one of their singles is Magic. So we did a Lord of the Illusions theme for them. Me being a child of the 90s, Lord of the Illusions was a cult popular movie at the time for kids, even though it's not a great movie objectively, but nonetheless, I enjoyed it as a kid. So that episode, and then the just a quick rapid fire on the rest. We've got The Guest 10-year retrospective with Doug Wicker coming. Brandon's going to come back and join us on that one. So Doug Wicker has been on the past. He was on our Evil Dead episode last year. Following that, we're going to do 3 Extremes, which I'm pretty excited about. It's our first time tackling an anthology movie. And I've always wanted to do some J-horror stuff. Haven't touched on it yet. And, this has got some of my favorite Japanese horror directors involved in it. And we're going to do that with Danny King of It's Just Two Movies. He's never seen the film, so he's going to be a first-time watcher, as well as Eli LaChance. Eli, I know, mutual friend of ours.
Yeah.
Eli's a great guy, very intelligent gentleman, and even he's always got great takes on stuff, even if I don't always agree with them. I respect the hell out of him because he's just super intelligent and comes from a very knowledgeable place with everything that he ever puts out there. So he's actually started up a new venture, Nocturne Books and Media, and so we're going to help promote what he's got going on over there as well. We're doing a Texas Chainsaw 50th anniversary watch-along, and we're doing that with Marcus Newstead of Fister. Unbeknownst to me, I wanted to do something a little bit different on this year, and I thought I'd hit up somebody in a band to do it with this time. And this is Marcus's all-time favorite horror movie. I did not know that. I offered it up to him, and he told me that it was after the fact, and he was very pumped to be a part of it. So me, him, and Ridge are going to sit down with some beers, probably a few blunts, and we're going to let her rip. We're going to have a good time with Texas Chainsaw Massacre for its 50th anniversary, and then we're going to end things with the Halloween programming on ATI, that is, with Nightmare on Elm Street, 40th anniversary. This is a top 10 movie all time for me. It is arguably, again, depends on your definition of horror. It's certainly up there with my favorite horror movies at the time, if not my favorite. Back to our conversations earlier about the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, as far as these slasher big franchises, even through New Line Cinema in particular, to me, this is the strongest franchise blow for blow as far as quality of movies, because even the bad ones are entertainably bad and watchable and still have redeeming qualities in them. Whereas I can pick through the Halloween filmography, I can pick through the Friday the 13th filmography, I can pick through the Child's Play filmography, and I can go on and on, the Saw, whoever else you want to throw out there, and I can point out so many bad spots in those that are unbearably bad. And I do not feel that way about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Don't know if it's just because I'm biased or partial. Certainly there's ones I like more than others, but I think it's the strongest of the slasher franchises personally. So, and then I know Ridge and Jake over on Waxing On with R&J are going to be doing something special. They like to do a Halloween-themed episode, so they're going to do some records and some music that they like to listen to in the Halloween season. So typically leans. I know my Halloween pick usually is post-punk, dark wave genres, and then strictly Misfits and Typo Negative. So that's usually pretty much me on Halloween, is just all of that. We throw in a little Skinny Puppy here and there, things of that ilk. So that is usually my Halloween listening personally and mode. There you go.
I'm going to listen to this.
Hell yeah.
This Vincent Price Witchcraft one.
Oh, dude, that's sick.
I'm excited.
Yeah, that's super sick. And I'm a big Vincent Price fan myself, so I'll be curious to hear how that turns out for you. Let me know.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Andy, thank you so much for your time this week. We're going to have all the links, of course, and be sharing your events as we always do. Big believer in what you guys are doing, big fan, and I really enjoy everything that you guys do for the St. Louis film community.
Hey man, I appreciate it. I appreciate you letting me have In the Mouth of Madness. It's one that I think gets overlooked because it was placed in the 90s.
I agree. And oddly, with this one, I was trying to remember last year whenever I had you do Videodrome. I don't remember if I told you that's the one you should do or if I gave you an option, but this one I gave you carte blanche. You're the first person. I was like, here's the movies we're doing. Tell me what you want. And you're like, obviously In the Mouth of Madness. And I'm like, okay, I'm all about that. So I love it.
Awesome.
Appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Hey there, this is Barrett from the ATI Podcast here to talk about what we have going on the ATI Podcast Network. First, we'll start with Waxing On with R and J. The format of Waxing On with R and J is audible selections made exclusively by our hosts and brothers, Ridge Jackson and Jake Jackson. Waxing On with R and J is sure to tickle your inner eardrums with some of the most vile tones you've ever encountered, and conversely, ear candy with pop melodies, focusing on spotlighting underground and rising artists. Waxing On with R&J is another outlet of the ATI podcast community to bring awareness to many musicians' craft. Also found on the ATI Podcast Network, Nodnarb's Closet, hosted by Brandon Stuart of Edaw's Inn. Nodnarb's Closet is a wing of the ATI podcast programming that delves into the world of roleplay games, miniature painting, diorama making, occasional pro wrestling match watch-alongs, providing commentary with a dash of jocularity and satire, and much, much more. Of course, leading the pack is the ATI Podcast. On the ATI Podcast, we episodically invite guests onto our show to spotlight their talents, whether that's musicians, filmmakers, artists, actors, businesses, even athletes. Nothing is off the table. The focus of the ATI Podcast and its collective creative arms, whether that's Waxing On with R and J or Nodnarb's Closet, is to bring awareness and focus to people's talents. Be sure to follow us across all traditional podcasting platforms, and for the full experience, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just search the ATI Podcast. Stay safe out there.